currently looking at a live shot in Algonquin Theatre of the All Candidates debate about to start up in just a few minutes. Welcome to Behind the Ballot. I'm James Bowler in studio today, and with me is Anthony Asuri, the host of Muskoka Matters. Thank you, Anthony, so much for joining us today.
Great to be here.
And we're going to be talking a bit about what we can expect during the debate tonight. I believe this is the fourth debate in the area. So there's been quite a few, actually it might be fifth. There's quite a few, matters that have come forward so far. But Anthony, from your perspective, I know you've been following this quite a bit. What do you think some of the major issues are that are coming forward right now in Muskoka and Parry Sound?
I think the biggest one that keeps coming up, and as no surprise, is climate change and the effects of that on the area, especially with recent floods, lots of storms. I think that's going to be an issue that keeps coming up over and over again, and many of the parties have defined their stance on climate change and what they want to do about it, and some still need to kind of flesh that out a little bit, and I think that will be one of the major issues what the candidates will be talking about tonight.
I think a lot of the other things I've been hearing from candidates is housing as a major issue, not just federally, but provincially, but obviously the federal government seems to have the most ability to deal with this kind of situation, right?
For sure, and I think that's going to be an issue about whoever forms government, how are they going to work with the provincial government? And I think one of the other issues too, even though it's a provincial responsibility, healthcare keeps on coming up again and again. Yep. And I think that will be an issue that will come up as well. And possibly even pharmacare, which I think would be interesting given that our population up here is a little bit older too.
I do want to ask you, and we hadn't really discussed this before, so I don't want to blindball you here, but say in a sort of hypothetical situation, it's not a Conservative Party that gets voted, but Liberals or somebody else. How do you think that would affect the local provincial government, which is Conservative government, and in terms of issues like healthcare?
I think obviously in the past it's worked really well. When Trudeau was in and Wynne was in, it worked well. Traditionally, Ontario likes to do the flip. They like to have different parties at different levels. This one's going to be interesting to see how it rolls out. And for so many years it was a sure thing, and I don't think this riding's a sure thing anymore.
Anthony, we're about to go to the debate now, so we're going to cut over to the live feed at the Algonquin Theatre. You'll see it on your screen in just a moment here, and you can see it here. We're about to start, and we're going to join them right now.
All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Huntsville Lake Bays Chamber of Commerce, 105.5 Moose FM, Hunters Bay Radio, Huntsville Doppler, Metroland Media, the Lakelands Association of Realtors, and Kojiko's Your TV, I would like to welcome you to this evening's forum, and thank you for coming. My name is Kelly Haywood. I'm from the Chamber of Commerce, and I'll be your moderator tonight. This evening's forum is comprised of 4 phases: opening statements, questions submitted by our media partners and community members, which I will pose, audience questions, and closing statements. Prior to the session, the candidates participated in a draw to determine the order in which they will speak, and seating is alphabetical by surname. Each candidate will be allotted 3 minutes for an opening address. Once the opening statements are presented, questions will be posed from our media partners, community members, and then the audience. In order to accommodate multiple audience questions, I ask that you do not duplicate a question that's already been posed, and I'd ask you to ask your question immediately. Please state your name, and then determine whether or not you'd like your question posed to a single candidate, multiple candidates, or all candidates. I'd ask that you please refrain from applause. If you require assistance and need the microphone to be brought to you for any reason, please raise your hand. And Torrin Sedeby, where are you? I can't see you. Oh, he's at the back by the sound booth. He will bring you a portable microphone. At approximately 8:45, we'll close the opportunity to pose questions to the candidates to allow for time for closing statements. Please respect this procedure. The rules were created to enable each of us to become more informed of our federal candidates' platforms. Thank you. So our first opening statement is Tricia Cowie.
Thank you very much. Oh, that's loud. Is that good
You're
sound?
fine.
Okay.
Yeah, get used to it.
All right, so my name is Tricia Cowie, and I am your federal Liberal candidate here in Parry Sound Muskoka. Some of you may recognize me from 2015. So this is my second time running. Last time around, I lost to Tony Clement by about 2,200 votes. I'm working hard to make that up. As some of you may know, we had a very exciting day today. The leader of the Liberal Party came to visit Parry Sound this afternoon, and I was very honored and proud to have him here in this riding. I believe that it shows his commitment to hearing rural voices and rural perspectives. And so I want to thank him for joining us in Parry Sound today. What I want to lay out is really where we're coming from in the last 4 years, but also where we're going for the next 4 years if you elect a Liberal government this October. I'm very proud of the gains and the progress that's been made in the past 4 years. In particular, in this riding that affects us here, we're looking at the Canada Child Benefit. That had major impact in this riding, helping over 13,000 families here. Across Canada, it was 300,000 families. If we look at, I'm a small business owner. We had a small business tax cut from 11% to 9%. We need that in this riding. It's the small business is the lifeblood of our economy. We look at our economy. We are growing steadily and surpassing expectations. Where we're going for the next 4 years, that's really important. The environment, it's important. Reconciliation, we have to keep moving forward. High-speed broadband internet, we need this in our area. And of course, affordable housing. We have a crisis on both sides of our riding, and I would like to fight to ensure that we get our fair share of the National Housing Strategy funding.
Thank you, Ms. Cowie. Scott Aitchison.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you to all the media partners for hosting and organizing. My name is Scott Aitchison. I'm currently the mayor of Huntsville and have served in that capacity for almost 5 years. I was first elected in Huntsville Council when I was about 21, so I kind of grew up on the front page of the local paper. Many of you know that. I'm eager to take this next step, though, because of the many issues that we've dealt with here locally. Tricia actually just mentioned one of them that is really near and dear to my heart, and one of the things that we've worked on very hard here in Huntsville, and that is the housing situation that we have. We've done a number of things locally with the district and, of course, with the local municipality, and I'd like to work in Ottawa to make sure that we are not ignored by federal policies that often forget that we don't all live in big cities. Andrew Scheer is committed to making changes to the mortgage stress test, to increasing amortization periods for first-time home buyers to make it more accessible for young families. Also doing an inquiry into money laundering in the real estate field, which is, I think, an important step. There's no shortage of money laundering that's actually driving prices up. And also, he's come up with an idea to make surplus federal lands available for development of housing, which is something that, of course, here in Huntsville we have done. We've given land to Habitat for Humanity on a number of occasions, and we've just recently done an RFP to donate lands to get more affordable housing built. And so I would like to take the experience and the knowledge and the work that I've done all over Muskoka and certainly here in Huntsville over the last 25 years and apply those skills to serve all of Parry Sound Muskoka and make sure that we are not forgotten by our government in Ottawa. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Young.
Thank you, everyone, for having us tonight. I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Tom Young, and I was born right here in Huntsville, Ontario, and I moved to Bracebridge as a teenager. My dad was in World War II, and he came home with heart disease, and yet he still worked as the front desk clerk here at the Empire Hotel. That's when it was being run like a real hotel back then. He eventually died of that disease when I was 4. My mom worked here as well as the crossing guard up at the post office, and when I was 5, she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. She went into the old Huntsville Hospital and stayed there for 7 years until she passed away when I was 12. I'm the youngest of 6 kids, and at the age of 5, we all were split up and went into fostering. I volunteer in our communities because it's very important to me. Things like the South Muskoka Memorial Hospital Foundation, the Salvation Army Food and Toy Drives, and the Huntsville Air Cadets, which I was a cadet as a kid, and the Bracebridge Army Cadets, just to name a few. Believe me, there's many more. And one of the things I'm really proud is of at Christmas time for many years now, I have put smiles on thousands of children's faces in a role that I play then. And I'm very proud that I actually took over for an icon here a few years ago in Bracebridge, and I took over for Ray Porter. The reason I'm running to be Member of Parliament for Parry Sound Muskoka, because this riding is in my blood. It really is. I truly care about the people in this riding. And on a few occasions, I've even been referred to as the ambassador to Muskoka. To represent this riding properly, you need to know the riding. You need to know the people in it. You need to know the issues and be willing to listen. And you need to act on them as soon as you can. I am that person. I'm the only one at this table right now that can honestly tell you that I've lived in this riding for 55 years. I'm excited to tell you about, as a New Democrat, what I will do for all of you. And things like universal pharmacare for all Canadians.
Gord Miller.
Hi, my name is Gord Miller, and I'm running for the Green Party of Canada. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm glad to see a large audience. For us, the central issue in this campaign is the climate emergency. The climate emergency is real, it's serious, and it's urgent. It's not just another environmental issue. It's the greatest security threat our world has ever seen. It affects everything. It affects our safety, our well-being, our economy, our food supply, and the very social contract we have between the government and the people. We cannot ignore it, and it cannot continue with our lifestyles and the way we're going. We owe it to our children and our grandchildren, the futures of our grandchildren, to take action and deal with the climate emergency. In that regard, that change has to start with Parliament, and who we send to Parliament is very important, and with respect to that change. This is sort of like a job competition up here. You're hiring your member of Parliament. These are the candidates. We're in the competition together. So I think I'll just take a moment and go over my resume for you. I was trained as a scientist, and I worked in acid rain, water quality in those days, other environmental issues. I've run businesses, worked for the Ministry of Environment as a pollution cop, and taught college courses. But most importantly, for this job, I have direct experience in the Parliament of Ontario. For 15 years, I had the privilege of serving as the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario, an officer of Parliament. My job was to protect the rights of people under the Environmental Bill of Rights and act as a watchdog and oversee and criticize government with respect to the decision-making about the environment. I understand the Member of Parliament's role. I know the procedures. I know the games. I have the experience to be your Member of Parliament.
Thank you. All right, we have some questions that have been submitted from our media partners. The first question has been submitted from Huntsville Doppler, and it's being posed to all candidates. The question is, what campaign policy particular to your party do you have the most trouble selling in this riding? We're going to start with Ms. Cowie.
That's an interesting question. Well, and as some of you may know, I am a lawyer, and I'm pretty quick on my feet in general. I can't think of a topic off the top of my head in terms of a topic that, an issue that I have a hard time selling. There's concerns that people have, and I address those concerns. I don't see it my job to force people to resonate with our party platform. I think that happens naturally as the conversation goes on.
Mr. Aitchison?
I think probably the one I have the toughest time selling, not because I don't believe it's a great start, but is in fact our environmental policies. We've published a 66-page document with 55 specific recommendations that focus on investing in Canadians and incentivizing Canadians to reduce their footprint, also investing in technology and creating green tax credits, but also taking the fight global. And I find that while I think it's a great start, it's not a complete plan. We need to do more. There's no question about that. And I find it difficult to convince people that I truly do believe that. So I do. You all know that now. That's probably the toughest sell, not specifically the policy, but that I'm committed to working with that framework and going deeper.
Mr. Young?
That's easy. How we're going to pay for it. I hear it all the time. That's what everyone says. And we do have a plan how we're going to pay for it, and it's not from you. It's not from the middle or the lower income people. We are truly, if we get elected in, going to get the money from the rich, the people that have been given money for years and been subsidized for years. We're going to go to them. It's called the super wealth plan. Anybody with over $20 million in net worth, and I'm not sure if that's anybody in this room, I just know nobody I know, we're going to charge 1% more tax on those people.
Mr. Miller.
I suppose the thing that people have a hard time understanding is our commitment to switch transportation to electricity. Electric cars are new to people. We don't quite understand. Up here, the distances we drive are larger, and they're worried about having enough charging stations, having enough charge in the car to get to where they have to go. So it's a new concept. I think it's new technology, and it grows on you. I've had the pleasure of driving electric vehicles, and I think once you get in one, you'll be very comfortable with them. But I appreciate that there's nervousness about switching from internal combustion engines to electricity as our main transportation system, but it's the way of the future.
Thank you. All right, their second question, also from Huntsville Doppler. The lack of affordable housing is of concern to many in Muskoka. How would you help to ensure that any federal policy changes would help smaller population centers like Muskoka? Start with Mr. Aitchison.
Thank you for the question. I think that there's been programs in the past that have worked really well. In our context here in Muskoka, the District of Muskoka is the authority responsible for housing and housing programs. And one of the greatest programs ever was this, what they called a capital subsidy. It was funded in part between the province and the federal government. And it made up to $70,000, depending on the program, available to builders to make the cost of constructing affordable units more viable here in our communities. It's expensive to build here. And so that's one of the programs that I think is an effective way of stimulating the private sector to build stuff, that the government doesn't have to own it forever, but it stimulates the private sector to get more units built, and it's a great investment of those dollars, and I would fight to get those kind of dollars back.
Mr. Young.
Well, it is important here. We've committed, well, the talking's got to stop and the action's got to start, and that's what our government has to do, and that's what we'll do. And we've committed to investing in 500,000 homes, quality, affordable homes across Canada. And if I was in Ottawa, I guarantee Ottawa would know all about Parry Sound Muskoka and the need here, and I would do everything, and I'd be very loud about it to make sure that we got our fair share of that. In fact, Jagmeet just announced today that for rental units, we will give immediate assistance to people up to 500,000 families of $5,000 per person to help them pay their rent.
Mr. Miller?
Well, of course, we have policy on safe, affordable housing as well. Affordable housing is really ultimately driven by the amount of money the federal government is willing to put up to support. And Scott's right, there are a number of programs that have been proven, and they've got to be funded, and we've got a plan for $1.5 billion of support. But also we've got an innovative approaches like having a federal minister of housing to coordinate between the provinces and the municipalities and get the federal government more involved in the role of housing. Also to create a Canada cooperative co-op housing strategy. Because co-op housing is a successful model that the feds funded some 20 years ago, and we think it needs to be redone or modernized and refunded.
Thank you. Ms. Cowie.
So I'm very proud to tell you this evening that we have a national housing strategy. The government did implement this in 2017, and it came with an envelope of $40 billion, and that has extended to $55 billion. In this riding alone, we have already seen over $10 million invested into affordable and accessible housing. That's really important. There's a big envelope there already, but you need somebody to fight for it. And I hope that that person will be me. And it's also really important to understand is which of these parties, if any of them, may cut that funding. We can't afford to cut that funding. We have a crisis in Parry Sound. We have a crisis in Muskoka. We need this investment to alleviate the hard times that people are going through in trying to find housing and maintain housing. And I would push you to look at our national housing strategy.
Thank you. All right, the next question has been posed by the Lakelands Association of Realtors. Do you believe that the mortgage stress test is impacting individuals and families in your riding? What adjustment do you feel should be implemented to address the negative consequences? Start with Mr. Miller.
Well, the mortgage stress test is a difficult thing because you always have to balance off establishing home buying for young people with limited finances against the risk of putting them in long-term threat because they can't afford it. Things like extending the as the Conservatives propose, the length of mortgages to 30 years is a dangerous risky kind of business. I think one has to be very careful with the mortgage stress test. Absolutely want to make sure it's fair and accessible to young people, but let's not trap young people into financial situations and commitments that 5 and 10 years down the road, if somebody loses a job, they're in big trouble.
Ms. Cowie.
So in 2008, 2009, when we had the recession and we had a lot of people lose their homes, the stress test is a response, in part, to what happened then. The stress test is important because it provides or forces cushion for people to have. So if interest rates go way up, these people will still be able to afford the homes that they're in. The stress test is important in terms of making sure that people can afford the homes that they're in. It's there as a protection measure, and it is important to maintain.
Mr. Aitchison.
Well, I'm in real estate as well as being the mayor, and so I've worked with young families and clients who are struggling to get into the housing market, and making changes to the mortgage stress test, specifically making sure that it's not unnecessarily onerous. Those stress tests on renewal, people are often trapped with the existing lender. They can't move because they have to go through the stress test over again. With values going up, we can make changes to the stress test and make it more available to young people. So there's some really minor little things you can do to tweak the stress test to make housing more accessible and home ownership more accessible to young families.
Mr. Young.
I think one of the most important things is that we create quality homes that are inexpensive so people can afford to get into them. There's too many homes nowadays, if you look in the new subdivisions, that are like $400,000+, which is crazy. No young family can get into that. It's not the old days where one parent works and the other one stays home. It's just not that way anymore. It's now that both parents have to work, and then of course they got daycare involved in that. So the biggest thing for us would be to make sure that there's affordable homes and keep the prices of them down.
All right. Also from the Lakelands Association of Realtors, the first-time home buyers incentive is a unique solution to the housing affordability problem experienced by many first-time home buyers. Do you feel there are other affordability measures that can help home buyers? We'll begin with Ms. Cowie.
Other affordability measures. Well, it would be nice if we had more houses. We have a high demand and we don't have enough places for people to be able to buy, and so places that are available are out of reach for many of us, especially when we're in a riding where the average income is $35,000 a year. So I think this is where the affordable housing envelope will really assist if we can build more as opposed to just on the lakes. We need to be building in-town homes that are accessible to us and build up the supply for the area. I think that would be a long-term measure that we could implement.
Thank you. Mr. Aitchison?
Yeah, more supply is certainly an important step, and getting rid of some of the regulatory barriers. I know we've done a lot of that locally here in Huntsville and certainly in Muskoka, but it's not just about the house itself. It's also about trying to make life a little more affordable for Canadians as well, and that's one of the core messages of the Conservative campaign, and certainly what I believe is that you should keep more of your own money. And so a Conservative government would take the GST, for example, off of home heating fuel. We would scrap the carbon tax and come up with far better tools to actually affect the climate change issue and not penalize people who live in rural communities that don't really have a choice to hop on the TTC, for example. We would like to lower personal taxes and make it a little more affordable for Canadians to live in general, and that will certainly help with affordability of homes, particularly for young families and first-time home buyers.
Mr. Young?
Well, first, one of the things we could do is up the minimum wage to $15 so people have more of an income. Secondly, We are becoming a seniors retirement area. And I've talked to some people lately that tell me that they have a big home and they'd like to downsize, but they can't afford to downsize into a smaller home. So if we make the smaller homes for seniors that they can live quality and downsize and get into one they can afford, then their home they can sell at a good price to another younger family that's up and coming that they can afford as well. And it's just a win-win situation.
Mr. Miller?
Well, I'm going to agree with Trish. I think that the building more homes and affordable homes, and it comes back to the affordable home question. I mean, that's, you want to get people into homes they're happy with and that they can afford. And so the affordable program, and actually, Mr. Young, we would go for a $15 an hour minimum wage as well for the same reason, because you've got to buttress they put a floor under the incomes, and you've got to make sure people have at least a reasonable amount of money to live. And that all ties into the affordability and trying to get young couples established into their own home for the first time.
Thank you. The following question has been submitted by Your TV. Muskoka has definitely seen an impact from climate change, most recently with the biggest flooding event in recorded history. What can your party do to address the climate change issue, as well as protect local homeowners from the uptick in natural disasters hitting close to home? Mr. Aitchison.
As I mentioned earlier, we have a fairly lengthy plan that focuses on technology, not taxes, incentivizing Canadians to reduce their footprint, taking the challenge global, because of course it is a global issue. But in terms of the flooding specifically, and I can speak, obviously quite clear to this one. I was involved in it fairly directly this past spring. The provincial government has listened to the municipalities who have raise the alarm bells to say we need to do something a little bit different than what we're doing now, because climate change has in fact changed the way the weather patterns are, and so we need to look at how we manage the water system in Muskoka, and the province has listened to us, and as a federal member of Parliament, I would stay actively engaged in that collaborative process to make sure that the tools we put in place and the adjustments we make to the water management plan actually do make a difference and protect people's homes and businesses.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
Well, this is a global issue. It's affecting everybody around the world, and of course right here in Parry Sound Muskoka, the flooding, and then of course the droughts in the summertime with the forest fires and everything, which I never saw as a kid here. The first and foremost thing we would do, and we would act immediately, we'd stop talking about it for over many, many years and start acting immediately. We have to, and that would be to stop subsidizing the big oil companies and giving them billions of dollars. Because if you're serious about climate change, then you've got to look to see where the issue is coming from, and that's a really good start for that one. And then move on from there. We would reduce emissions by 38.4% by 2030, and it's just you got to act right away. And we would create 300,000 new jobs by doing so, and there'd be clean energy jobs.
Mr. Miller.
Of course, the Green Party has a long and comprehensive plan to address the climate change issue, but just as, of course, we would put a price on carbon. We would have a dividend thing to put a price on carbon. We'd eliminate fossil fuel subsidies, as Mr. Young has indicated. We'd ban fracking, and we'd move transportation back onto the rails as much as possible. We need to train a working rail system in this country. We'd get off the internal combustion engine eventually and get into electric transportation, electric cars. A number of other issues. We have a comprehensive plan.
Ms. Cowie.
So the floods from this spring were caused by a number of different, you can't put it on one thing. I know we brought up climate change there in the question, but it also comes to infrastructure, the ability to handle it, came to the provincial water management program. So it's not just a one-size-fits-all solution. There's a lot of issues that we have to tackle at the same time. In terms of climate change, a price on pollution is the best way that we can lower our emissions. We have to keep that price on pollution. We can't afford to take that one step forward and go 10 steps back. We have to be able to mitigate risk for the future. In terms of what we're doing for people to help deal with situations like in a flood, I know there's been a new announcement with regard to interest-free loans if you're retrofitting your house. I think that that's really important. We need to be able to upgrade our homes so that they can respond appropriately when we have these flooding situations or other extreme weather situations. We have to have homes.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have to have
Sorry.
homes.
Time's up. Also from Your TV. Recently, Your TV spoke to a local business owner in Huntsville who admitted he had to work 14-hour days just to make ends meet. What plans does your party have to help ease the stress on small business? Mr. Young?
Well, small businesses are the engine of our country. Majority of our employers are small business owners, and it is tough, especially in a seasonal tourist area like this. I used to be a small business owner years ago, and the shoulder seasons are very tough, and if you don't have a winter, it's even tougher. Our Pharma Care, for example, would help small businesses because that would, if you have benefits for your staff, then that would save you $600 a year per staff on that as well. When the staff are healthier, then they're at work more and there's less time off of work. And also we would make it take that tax off of trying to transfer your business from family member to family member. We'd make that easier for you.
Mr. Miller?
Well, there's lots of small businesses, of course, the lifeblood of the country. There are numbers of small businesses. Difficult to have the same one formula for all. But one aspect of small business that we think is very important is the building, the people that work in renovating houses and that kind of construction. And we see as a part of our climate change plan the need to have a major refurbing of all homes, of commercial buildings, of institutional buildings. And we see a lot of support so that we can increase the insulation, we can increase the sun, and that generates all sorts of work for small businesses and trades in a place like Parry Sound Muskoka.
Ms. Cowie?
So in terms of what we're doing for small business, we need the high-speed broadband internet. In this situation, that's not going to help this gentleman or this business owner. But that is one of the ways we can grow our local economy and help our local business owners. But one of the things that I'm really excited about from what the Liberal government implemented is a program with immigration in Sudbury. So they're trying to utilize immigration in rural communities like ours to help fill those jobs so that that small business owner doesn't have to work those 14-hour days. That's really important. So here in Parry Sound Muskoka, we have a great economy going, but I see help wanted signs all over the place. This summer alone, I had 2 renters at my house because we couldn't find, they wouldn't be able to work up here otherwise if they didn't have a place to stay. So we rented a room. These are ways that we can help small business owners here. We need to work on affordable housing, but also we need to be able to find new ways that we can help business owners fill those job positions, and immigration will be one of those ways.
Mr. Aitchison?
Yeah, I think, and Trish just touched on it at the very end. I'm happy to further the point because I think you're absolutely right. Affordable housing and housing in general is a major issue for small business and large business all over Parry Sound Muskoka. I've talked to many business owners who say, I have jobs to fill, but I can't find people to do it. When I find someone that maybe would consider moving here, they can't find a place to live. So that's priority number 1, to help small business. I think the other big thing for us as Conservatives, though, is to help small business owners keep more of their hard-earned money so they can be reinvesting it back into their businesses. We believe, strongly that, small businesses aren't tax cheats. They are the vibrancy and lifeblood of our economy, and we need to support them and help them keep more of their hard-earned money so they can reinvest it back into their business and our communities.
Thank you. All right, this question has been posed to Scott Aitchison and has been posed by a member of our community. Would your government promise to not raise old age security age of eligibility to 67 as Stephen Harper did?
It's certainly not part of the platform, and I'm not in favor of that, so I would certainly fight against it if it was raised, but it's not part of our platform to do that.
Is there any rebuttal? The next question, no, we're good. Also from a community member, and this is posed to Mr. Miller. Aside from environmental policies, what progressive policies do the Greens support? Is it your party's stance pro-choice or anti-choice when it comes to government interference in a women's reproductive rights?
All the Green Party candidates, when they agree to run as the Green Party candidates, agree that to support a pro-choice position. It's clearly it's not a policy issue for us. So the right of a woman to have a safe and legal abortion as accepted as is the law of the land and as the position of all the Green Party candidates.
Thank you. Anything further from any candidates? Mr. Young.
We have lots of policies. I mean, look at this book, it's thick, and I've been studying it for weeks. So we have all kinds of things that we want to introduce, not just climate change, farmer care, food security, housing, seniors issues, all kinds of stuff that we want to do. I mean, I can go through here, LGBTQ, immigration, women's rights, lots of things that we want to implement. And as for the pro-choice, 100%. It's a woman's right to make her own decisions of what she's going to do.
All right. All right, we will now proceed with questions from the audience. I'll ask that you stand in line at either microphone, and I'll toggle back between the aisles. Please immediately state your name and pose your question. We'll start with the gentleman who's ready at the microphone. What's your name, sir?
Jim Bjork.
Mr. Bjork.
My question for all four candidates is, how can we return to using the Bank of Canada for government spending?
We'll begin with Mr. Miller.
Well, thanks for the question. And we talked earlier. Yeah, of course, he's referring, people aren't perhaps familiar with the way central banking works, but there is a different way. Our central banking works, that's when the government has to borrow money to create debt in order to finance either just operations or capital spending. There is another model, and it's based on the issuing the debt against, or just issuing currency from the Central Bank of Canada. It's not a new thing. It's been around for a long time. It's a huge variation. It's not our policy. We don't have anything, but I'm certainly aware of it, and I'm certainly, if there was to be a national debate on this issue, we'd participate.
Ms. Cowie?
I think that at this point it would be a political decision. So you would have to put together a petition and find support politically. I know that this was shut down in the courts, and they did say that it was a political issue there, and that's the route that you would have to take.
Mr. Aitchison?
Jim, you asked the question at Sunridge, and I still haven't read the book you left me. I apologize. I've started it, but I really don't know the answer to the question. I'm not an expert on it yet, but when I'm done reading the book, I guarantee you we'll talk about it some more.
Mr. Young?
Well, you just gave me the pamphlet tonight, so I definitely haven't read it. But what I would commit to you as a member of Parliament for Parry Sound Muskoka is I would sit down with you and learn more about it for sure, and find out what you wanted and what your group wanted and what the constituents of this riding wanted, because that's what we were here for. If you're elected as MP, you got to speak for the riding or the people in the riding. So I would definitely, whether it's your group or any other issue that's going on, sit down with you and find out and learn from you, and then go to Ottawa with that.
Any further rebuttal? All right. Please state your name.
It's Doug Austin. The question is regarding housing, but first, thank you to all of you for putting yourselves out there. We appreciate it. And I bought my first house using the RHOSP, Registered Home Ownership Savings Plan, in the 80s. What about returning to that, or a Registered Home Improvement Savings Plan to go for making your house more efficient rather? Just some ideas, and I'd like to hear your thoughts to all candidates, please.
Ms. Cowie?
I'm not familiar with either of those programs, but what I can tell you is with the National Housing Strategy that we have put together, it is very flexible. So it is very much supposed to depend or rely on what the people in Parry Sound Muskoka need or want. So my understanding is that would be responsive to that type of suggestion, and we would just need the information to be able to implement it.
Mr. Aitchison?
Good question, Doug. Thank you. I'm not as familiar with the RHOSP either, but there's clearly been some great programs over the years, and one of the planks of our platform is to actually provide some tax credits related to greening your homes, making them more efficient, reducing your bills. It's really, in many ways, a lot of the things that we did here at the town of Huntsville by putting LED lights on the streets and trying to reduce our footprint that way, and it's a great way to do that with homes. I think that the program you mentioned is a great idea, and I'm sure there are others that we could do. And I'd be interested in learning more about some of how it worked when you did it, and if there are others we can explore.
Mr. Young?
Back in the early 80s, I was still in high school. I know it doesn't look like it, so I'm not familiar with that plan whatsoever. I didn't own a home back then. I was living with my parents. But we do have a plan to retrofit homes and make them a lot greener, completely green, to whether it's insulation, electric heat, or solar, hydro, whatever it is, and windows and everything. We do have a plan to turn homes and actually all buildings in Canada into green energy for sure.
Mr. Miller?
Well, I guess I'm showing my age because, of course, I utilized the RHOSP program with my wife to buy our first home. So it was a good plan. It worked. But moving to this day and age, our plan is to retrofit all buildings, all residential buildings, all commercial buildings, but by 2030 to be carbon neutral. We're interested in spending and investing a lot of money to get things moving to really transform the built economy to be carbon neutral. It's a job creator, and it's a very worth program. As you know, we've had some government programs, both provincially and federally, to do these kind of things on a smaller scale, and they've all been oversubscribed and very successful. So let's get serious and really do it in a big way.
Thank you. All right, I'll take our next question.
My name's Sandra Ray, and my question is to all candidates, and nobody's brought this up tonight. I'm just wondering about the huge increase in gun crime in this country and how you feel personally about banning handguns and AK-47s. Thank you.
Mr. Aitchison.
Thank you for raising the question, Sandra. I'm not in favor of actually banning handguns. I think it's political doublespeak to suggest that banning handguns is going to solve gun crimes in the big cities. I think that it's important for us to understand where those guns are coming from. They're being smuggled in from the United States. I think it's important for us to understand the root causes of why people join gangs in the first place, and I think we need to deal with those issues. It's going to take longer. It's not an easy fix, and so I am offended by politicians who throw a handgun ban out as a solution to real problems. So I'm not in favor of banning anything until we deal with the root problems that cause the violence in the first place.
Mr. Young?
Well, we are in support of gun control for sure. We got to get serious about that. There's too much murders and stuff going on now. We need to get tougher with the gun smuggling that's coming across the border, and we also need to get tougher in our justice system when it comes to things like that. So we are definitely in support of a gun control and a lot tougher than we have right now.
Mr. Miller?
Well, you mentioned AK-47. Let's get on the record here. AK-47s are a prohibited weapon in this country. You cannot have one, you cannot own one, and to do so is a serious crime. Handguns are owned, some of them are owned by people in shooting clubs and are highly regulated in this country. But the kind of thing that you're talking about are the handguns in the hands of gangs and criminals in the cities that have resulted in recent killings and shootings of all sorts. Those are overwhelmingly smuggled into this country from the United States, and that, in our party position, is don't proceed after and pursue long guns, which are used for hunting and the normal use in rural properties, but let's crack down on the transboundary smuggling of handguns, which are used in criminal activities.
Ms. Cowie?
Well, Scott, be prepared to be offended, because I do agree that we need to take military-grade weapons out of the hands of civilians. There's no reason for a member of the public to have a military-grade weapon, and the Liberal government of Canada, or the Liberal Party, has pledged to remove or to ban military-grade weapons, which is really important because we don't want to be reactive when it comes to people's lives. We have to be proactive, and that's not to disagree to say we have to deal with other issues. We do. We have to look at the root of violence as well, but this is one way that we know will work. When it comes to handguns, we've also committed to leaving that up to municipalities. So Parry Sound Muskoka is not the same as Toronto, and so we will leave it with the people who know best in their areas with regard to handguns, but we need to be able to respond to the rising gun violence. There has been a lot of money put into fighting that, the guns and gangs across the border with the border security and with the RCMP, and we've provided those tools.
Rebuttal. Mr. Aitchison and Mr. Miller. We will do Mr. Miller, please.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
Mr. Miller?
Yeah,
Yep.
I just want to be careful because there's a lot of vague language used. Military-grade weapons, I don't know what that is. I know what shotguns are. I know about duck hunting. I know about deer hunting. But I don't know what military-grade weapons are. And I think when you use language like that, one has to be very careful, because if you're going to ban military-grade weapons, it could easily creep into the kind of long gun ban that a hunting and recreational industry depends on, and I wouldn't be in favor of that.
Mr. Aitchison?
Yeah, I think that Gord's made a really good point, and I think that we're talking about the issues that are going on right now, and you see them all in the news. It's not military-grade weapons. We're talking about handgun violence amongst gangs in Toronto. We are very different than Toronto. That's very true. And if the Liberals want to come up with some kind of a system that somehow gets around the Constitution and lets cities do their own thing with handgun bans, that's fine. They can try to do that. But what I'm saying is that any kind of ban or coming up with something like military grade, like you said, doesn't address the real issue, and it's disingenuous to suggest that banning something that isn't in the news like handguns are is going to solve a problem. We need to deal with the problem itself, not what's going to make us feel better.
Thank you. We are over here. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Paul Kubler. I'm from Port Sydney. First, to the organizers, thanks very much for giving an opportunity from the floor to ask questions. We appreciate that. If elected, this is to all candidates, if elected, how will you possibly represent the people of Parry Sound Muskoka in the legislature when on every vote you are told how to vote by your party whip? And do you support this system of government?
We'll start with Mr. Young.
Well, whip votes, of course, are a huge problem because it takes the power away from individual members. In the major parties, give a sheet of paper on a vote in the House of Parliament, and they say, here is how you're voting today, and you cannot refuse to, else there are repercussions against you. I'm pleased to say the Green Party has no party whip, will have no party whip, and does not believe in whipping votes. We believe that people must send their members to Parliament to look after the constituency, represent the constituency, and do the best job they can without being told by the leader's office how they must vote, or they could lose their seat next time because the leader won't sign their papers.
Mr. Miller. Oh, sorry. Mr. Young.
I can go again if you want.
Mr. Young. Sorry about that.
So I'm not aware of whipping in our party. I'm not aware of it. I'm there to, if I'm elected, I'm there to speak for Parry Sound Muskoka. I think our platform is so good that that wouldn't be necessary anyways, because it really speaks to everybody and needs of everybody here in Parry Sound Muskoka. So I don't ever think it would be an issue, and I don't think I've ever been told in the past, other than people that really, other than my mom and dad, what to do before anyways.
Ms. Cowie?
So there are certain topics that my vote would be whipped. When it comes to budget, when it comes to issues of the charter, for example, we're vetted, I'm pro-choice, and that's how my vote would go. But we have seen a difference in the last 4 years. We have had more freedom, there's enough articles out there you can look into it yourself where you're not always agreeing with the party line, but there are certain instances where yes, we have to agree, and those two are budgets and with regard to the charter. But we have more freedom these days.
Mr. Aitchison.
There was a second part to that question. Do they support whipped votes?
You can capture that in your rebuttal if you'd like. Mr. Aitchison.
Thank you for the question. I think that it was one of my considerations when I decided to do this and make an attempt to become the member of Parliament is understanding how it works. And on the broad, the policy of the party, I do agree, and I think Trish is quite correct that on matters of the party policy, like a budget, for example, I'm generally inclined to support that anyhow, because of course I signed up with this party, not some other one. I think that the Conservative Party, one of the reasons I'm a Conservative is because it is a party of principle. I think that occasionally there are whip votes, but if there was something that I just simply could not support because of my conscience, I will always be who I am, and I'll be true to that. If I couldn't support it, then I wouldn't be able to do that.
Rebuttal. I know Mr. Miller. Is there anyone else? Mr. Young? All right, Mr. Miller.
Well, just for Mr. Young's sake, just to a bit of a point of information, the second Green member of Parliament in Ottawa back some years ago was Bruce Heyer. Bruce Heyer was kicked out of the NDP party because he wouldn't be whipped in a vote, and he crossed the floor and became the second Green MP. So just for you, Tom, there's some history there that we share.
Mr. Young.
Thanks, Dad. You know what? I joined the NDP party because I really truly believe in the NDP party, because I really truly believe it is for the people, and so I would agree with what my party went with.
Thank you.
Sorry, may I?
You may.
Because the second part of your question was, do you support whip votes, right? And I do see its usefulness in some circumstances. So, I mean, you're there as a team, and you make promises to Canadians, and you have to be able to get that agenda through. So I do think that there is value to whip votes.
Anything else, Mr. Richardson? No. All right, our next question.
Thank you. My name is Doug Wilson. I have a question for the Liberal candidate. Last time I saw a financial thing, it indicated that the Weston family had a net worth of $8.7 billion. That's billion with a B. Why did the Prime Minister feel it was necessary to give the Weston family $12 million to upgrade the refrigerators in their Loblaw stores?
Thank you. Ms. Cowie.
I don't know what, I wouldn't be privy to why they decided to do that. I do feel your angst and why that decision may have been made. And at the end of the day, it was a program that any corporation could have applied to. They were the ones who were chosen out of the program, and that's to update, and that's for environmental reasons. So updating their fridges, that's an important thing. They're a big corporation. But I do understand where you're coming from in that department, and I can't say it sits entirely well with me either.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to comment? Mr. Young and Mr. Miller. All right. Go ahead, Mr. Young.
Our party's made it very, very clear that we would not support that whatsoever. We've made it very, very clear that we're not in this to support the rich. We're here to support the average middle to lower income people, like probably most of the people in this room. Average Canadians, what we're here to support, not the rich people. They've got enough money as it is. They don't need any more of our tax dollars.
Mr. Miller?
Well, obviously the Westons got monies for refrigerator to keep the bread from going bad. But that, I think, it illustrates the key point that how tight the Liberal Party is with major corporations, and that itself is a governance problem in this country. It is, big corporations isn't who we cater to, whether it be SNC-Lavalin or the Westons or any of the pharmaceutical companies. It's the people we should be paying attention to, and that speaks to the problem. It's a good example. Thank you.
Ms. Cowie.
Sure. Just to speak to that issue, one of the things that I'm very proud of with regard to what the government did was making more transparency when it came to fundraisers and hosting events where you're inviting people to raise money. And they did that in response to the rules that were in place before. People aren't comfortable with things happening behind closed doors. And so they did. They made things public. They have to do a post and let people know where the meeting is, who's invited. And I think there's been a lot more transparency. And I don't think, no matter which government is formed in October, you have to work with corporations. They hire people. They give us money. We have to be able to work with them. And it's not about being in their pocket. It's about trying to balance the competing interests that we have. Corporations aren't bad. They're made up of people. We have to be able to balance that interest.
Thank you. Did you have anything, Mr. Richardson? No. All right. Oh, sorry, did I miss that?
No, I'm as disgusted as Doug is with it, and transparency is all well and good, unless it's SNC-Lavalin, I would say.
Do I get another rebuttal?
Afraid not. You can capture it in your closing. Okay.
Hello, I'm Charles Cooper. I'm a small business owner that you've all kind of mentioned, and all of my employees are paid more than, actually double minimum wage here in Ontario. So I'm the type of employer you want. What are you all prepared to do? This is a question to all of you, to minimize the barriers we have between the provinces. An example is, I can buy an F-350 pickup truck in Vancouver, Halifax here, no issue. As soon as I buy a commercial truck, I have provincial barriers like there's no tomorrow, nor can my crew work in other provinces. What are you prepared to do to minimize those barriers?
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Mr. Aitchison will begin.
Yeah, great question, Charles, and it's actually one of the most ridiculous things that goes on in this country, really. When you think about it, it's easier to trade with the United States than it is for Ontario to trade with BC. And so I know that currently there's a number of premiers working on this to try to reduce these barriers, and I think it's important for the federal government to play a role in facilitating that discussion and helping them do that. In terms of eliminating those barriers, I think there's some constitutional issues that means you'd have to work with them as opposed to just ordering them. So I would like to think that our government would work and help to facilitate reducing those barriers.
Mr. Miller?
Well, I've never understood them. I know what you're talking about, and I would certainly, it's ridiculous. What we would do, we would oppose them. We would try to get the provinces. Ultimately, the provinces are doing this between themselves. And that conflict is senseless. It's not counterproductive. And anything we can do to facilitate that kind of discussion and break down those things is a good and necessary thing. I can, as you might know, it would take a lot of work between some provinces. The particular example is between Quebec and Ontario. We've had tremendous problems dating back about movement of workers and contracts between it. So it's an ongoing thing in Canada. Absolutely support freeing that up. Anything we can do, we would help.
Mr. Young?
Hey, Charles, you're right. You are a good employer, and because I've talked to your staff many times when you got the truck in the shop to get fixed, and they're very happy with you. I don't know what the NDP plan is for that, to be honest with you. I haven't checked into that, but I agree that we should be facilitating that with the provinces for sure. I mean, when you have emergencies all over this Canada, this country, Ontario Hydro goes all over the place to help people from province to province to help things out. So it shouldn't be a problem, and we should be helping each other out and working together as Canadians for sure.
Ms. Cowie?
Thanks for your question, Charles. And I have to say, the back of my mind, something is kind of nagging at me that I think the Liberals have already done something to help address that issue. I can't think of what it is at this time, and I would be happy to follow up with you after we're done here. But certainly I would echo my friend's comments here about needing to collaborate with the provinces. You have to be able to have a good relationship with the different levels of government, and people need a collaborator in here. And I hope that we can discuss this further, because the other way I would go about this is, you sound like you know what you're talking about, and I need to know exactly what issues you're having so that I can address them. So I'm not going to pretend to know everything here, and I would lean on you for information on what I could do to make your life better when you're crossing that border between provinces. So thank you for that.
Any rebuttal?
Thank you.
Okay. Move on to the next gentleman.
My name is Peter Sanguinetti. I'm from Emmsdale, and I'm a director of the Canadian Alliance of British Pensioners. And because of the UK government's pension policy, my UK state pension will never, ever get increased. I appreciate you probably never heard of this issue, but before I want you to make clear to you that I expect you to become fully mindful of this situation. And I have prepared a handout which I've left with your assistance. In this writing, there are about 1,100 people who originally came from Britain.
Sir, can you please pose your question?
My question is really, do I get your assurance that when you have been in Parliament for about 6 months, you will give me the opportunity of having a meeting in your writing office to fully discuss this issue and to explain to you how Canadian MPs can have an influence on this effect, because the UK government's withdrawal of the money, $306 million, wasn't paid to UK pensioners in 2017. When you do the microeconomic calculation, that translates into $906 million.
Thank you.
For the year, and it will get worse.
Thank you, sir. All right, we'll start with Mr. Miller, please.
I certainly would commit to find out about this. It's beyond my experience, my knowledge, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say, and there's no problem. That's the kind of thing a member of Parliament do, and I'd be surprised if anybody here would disagree with that. Certainly we'll sit down, certainly find out what the issue is and how we can be of assistance. Thank you.
Mr. Young?
If we're going to make informed decisions, we got to be informed. And so the answer to your question, would I sit down with you in the first 6 months and talk with you? No, I would sit down with you in the first month. I wouldn't wait 6 months. And I'd be talking to you then and get the information as soon as I could.
You got my card.
Ms. Cowie?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a number one job of your elected representatives. You have to be accessible and you have to be able to address these concerns. So I think that's probably one of the easier commitments that I would be able to make.
Thank you.
Mr. Aitchison?
Peter, I have your card. I'm going to talk to you before the election's over because I'm interested to know more about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Sir?
Roger Chamberlain, and I'd like to address this question to the Liberal candidate and anybody else that wants to comment. The Liberal slogan this year is moving forward, and I think that's only because they don't want anybody to look at what Trudeau's done for the last 4 years. I mean, he's had 2 ethics violations. He's had fired 2 prominent women from his cabinet over SNC-Lavalin. He's had insulted a First Nations woman at a fundraiser. He's
Mr. Chamberlain, I need you to pose your question specific, please.
all right. Along with his blackface and his thing, I just find it hard to understand how anybody can run for the Liberal candidate in any riding across Canada with Trudeau as the Prime Minister and the head of the party.
And that's not really a question, but I'll let you address it.
Well, I'm going to start with nobody's perfect. I know that there has been controversy along the way. It's very easy for me to stand up here and support the Liberal Party. In 2015, the number one issue I was hearing out the door was the economy. You know how many times I've heard about that this time around? 0. You know why? Because we actually invested in Canadians. We've made over Canadians have made over 1.1 million jobs, raising 900,000 Canadians above the poverty line. That's not nothing. We've actually invested in this and we're making a huge difference. And these are quantified, factual changes. And I'm very proud to stand behind the record that we've created. And it's very easy for me to be here today. I'm very proud.
I don't think Prime Minister Trudeau has been very good
Sir,
at standing
I'm
behind
sorry.
everything.
It's not a dialogue. I'll let the candidates answer the questions. So, Mr. Young, go ahead.
So you're right. What's happening over the last few months or a year, whatever, is embarrassing. There's a lot of things that have happened that shouldn't have happened. But the way I look at it is I obviously don't support the Liberals. I support the NDP. But we all make mistakes, and I'll agree with that. But the difference is when you make a mistake, and I've always been told this as a little kid, and I'm getting older, that if you make a mistake, admit to it, learn from it, and move on. Don't blame it on somebody else, right? And don't try to hide it. Admit
Glad
to
you're
it and
learning,
move on.
son. Glad you're learning, son.
Thanks, Dad.
Mr. Aitchison?
I don't think that Justin Trudeau is a bad person. I think he loves this Canada he loves Canada as much as all the rest of us. I think he's a genuinely nice guy. I've met him. He's quite charming. I think he's just really inexperienced. Don't think he really knows what he's doing, and I think that's what gets him into trouble. So I'd like to see him retire to something else, and we'll take over from here. Thanks.
Mr. Miller?
Oh, I'm not touching that one.
Is there any rebuttal?
One important thing I want to talk about is the progressiveness of his agenda. We're talking about transformative changes. We're talking about new trade deals. We're talking about moving forward on the TRC. We're talking about the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report. These are big changes. He didn't just say, okay, we're going to give you a tax break. We are talking about changing the direction Canada is going. We're talking about serious climate action. We're talking about a price on pollution, transformative, positive changes for Canada that is going to affect not only myself, but my son and his kids and your kids. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I do, I do want to add something, if I may.
Where's rebuttal? Yeah.
I just, I know Trish. She's a really good person. She has no reason to be embarrassed about anything. She's standing up here like everybody else. This is not an easy thing to do. I've done it many, many times in municipal. It's a different game. It's not easy to do, and I respect her for doing it, and I think we all should. It's not an easy thing to do, especially when, the national campaign is doing its thing. We all get along. We're all very civil to each other, and that's important because this is our home, and we all live here. And so Trish has no reason to be embarrassed about anything, and I just want that to be stated for the record.
I hope it's clear that I'm not.
Yeah, good. Well, I don't know.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on. Sir?
Thanks. My name is Greg Ruverkamp. I wasn't going to ask a question, but my question's to Ms. Cowie after your statement about transparency in the Liberal Party. If you're elected as our MP and go to Ottawa, would you support, first of all, the lifting of the cabinet confidentiality that the Prime Minister has said that the Privy Council officer is holding? The Prime Minister has the power to lift that, and yet so far he won't. I'm specifically referring to Ms. Wilson-Raybould and Ms. Philpott, so that they can tell their story about what happened in February of this year. That story hasn't been told yet. The second thing that I would wonder if you would support would be the lifting of the gag order on Admiral Norman, who, as you may know, was embroiled in a scandal. It went to court, it didn't finish, and everybody knows that he has been paid a sum of money to stay quiet. Would you support his story being told?
All right, Ms. Cowie.
Sure. So being a lawyer myself, I understand very deeply the importance and significance of confidentiality when I'm working with a client. And part of the reason why that's there is so that you can trust me. So when you come into my office and we have a conversation, you know that it's not going to go anywhere. And when we're talking about privilege in cabinet, that has to remain there. We need to be able to have conversations when you're part of a team and you're in cabinet. You need to be able to have those conversations that are open. The government provided a waiver, the largest waiver in Canadian history, with regard to that. They went beyond what I would have advised from in the beginning. And that's because of my understanding of the importance of being able to have open conversations and know that that no matter how distasteful what you say, it's not going to go anywhere. Because if we don't have those practical conversations, we're going to be in trouble.
And we have Mr. Miller and Mr. Young. Mr. Aitchison, do you care to weigh in? You'd be first, if so.
No, I'm good.
Okay, Mr. Miller.
Well, I think it's an excellent question, and this is bigger than just regular cabinet solidar secrecy and such thing, because this speaks to the integrity of the judicial system in this country. Ms. Wilson-Raybould and Philpott, that whole thing, the information has to come out in full disclosure, because we have to protect the integrity of our system, the separation of the executive branch from the judiciary. It certainly appears from what we know now that the Prime Minister's office was messing with our judicial system, and that cannot stand. So we need to know the facts. We need to know what comes out. So this is an exceptional situation, and the general tradition of cabinet secrecy the veil should be lifted. I absolutely agree with you.
Mr. Young?
Well, honesty is the best policy. I've always been brought up with that, and integrity. And if you're going to do that, you've got to do that. You've got to be honest. And I don't know, same as probably everybody in this room, for sure, whether or not, because we haven't heard from anybody yet, really, whether or not the judicial system has been tampered with or not. But if it has, then yes, it should come out, because our justice system is there for a reason, and it should be upheld.
Ms. Cowie, any other rebuttal?
And sure, so as a lawyer, I understand we can't have a banana republic. There has to be prosecutorial independence. But I'm going to say what I said from the very beginning as well. The one thing that got lost in all of this, where we had an opportunity for actual democratic debate, was what is improper pressure. That got entirely lost because of the polarization of the conversation. And that's a major problem. And now we have a report from Anne McClellan to talk about, okay, this is how we make sure this problem doesn't happen again. Because these rules aren't written down in our system. It's in hindsight that we see, okay, there may have been a problem here. But they had the foresight to say, let's look at how we fix this. And that's what we're going to be doing with the Anne McClellan report, is implementing her recommendations.
Can I get one clarification, please? Could you speak as well to the Admiral Norman case? Because so
We'll
far I
bring
believe
that
we've
up.
only been talking to...
We'll have that as a second question.
Okay.
Mr. Aitchison.
Yeah, so the whole SNC Lavalin affair, I think what's probably most troubling for Canadians, of course, is how it all went down, and that there was a deal for a corporation, and I think the biggest challenge most people have with that, of course, is that Justin Trudeau came to power with sunny ways and was going to be transparent. Everything was going to be all this above board. He railed against the Harper era. And then these kinds of things happened, and and the situation with Admiral Norman is disgusting. He was railroaded, and so the Conservative Party has said they will actually open an investigation into the whole affair, and I support that because we need to know the truth.
And to speak to the second part of the question, anyone else?
Sorry, that was with regard to the Admiral Norman part?
Yes, that's correct.
And you had asked about removing the gag order, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So I understand that they went into settlement negotiations, and again, being a lawyer, you have to understand that when you have a settlement agreement, that's what it is.
A Prime Minister could...
Oh, it's not a dialogue, sorry. Are you done?
We just have to have certainty in those agreements, otherwise why would anybody enter into them?
Mr. Young.
I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to speak like I am, but I've been brought up to know that honesty and transparency is always the best practice, no matter what, and I will always believe in that.
Thank you.
All right, moving on.
I have a question for all the candidates. They all have a platform for our community. Have you met personally with the leader of your party to discuss the needs of our community? And if you haven't, why not? How are you going to get anything done?
Mr. Aitchison.
No, I have not met with the leader of our party. As a mayor, though, I can tell you I've met with the leader of Ontario a number of times. I've met with leaders of all the other municipalities in Muskoka. And I will obviously, if I get elected, we'll be meeting with the leader as soon as I'm sworn in and get to Ottawa. So I have a bit of a history of actually working collaboratively with other leaders, and I don't see why I would be any different in Ottawa. And I would be happy to work with Andrew here. I have a lot of respect for that man.
Mr. Young.
Yes, I have met with Jugmeet in Hamilton, and we had the pleasure of chatting with him. He's just very much like me, a very down-to-earth, great guy. And yes, sorry, plug. Anyways, so he is quite aware of what's happening here in Parry Sound Muskoka. We have had a long chat about it, yes.
Mr. Miller.
Not being as down to earth is great, perhaps, but I do know my leader. We've known each other for many years, and she's been here in this election, and we have discussed this riding. She was very interested in that, and the dynamic of the four communities, the district municipality concept. She's very interested in this, and was very instrumental in me being before you today. So, yes, my leader knows us, and I know my leader very well.
Ms. Cowie.
And I do have to say it is difficult to have that connection with the party leader, especially when you're not in government yourself. But I did have the privilege of meeting with Justin Trudeau today. And of course, we talked about concerns that are affecting this riding. And when it comes to the environment, we know that that's a top priority, but we also know that it's not the only priority. And we did have a little bit of a conversation about that. And in the context of the environment, important, but also people have to be able to take care of themselves today. And so affordable housing, we have to look at that for people today so that they can do more than just get by. So we did have a very constructive conversation about issues in this riding. Thank you.
Anything further? Right. Hello.
Good evening. My name is Suzanne Willett, and I just want to thank the four candidates. And I just want to thank you for your affordable housing, your commitment to affordable housing. But if you've ever had to do your grocery shopping at a food bank, you'll know that the majority of the food there is highly processed. And I'm not blaming the food banks. That's just the reality of how they get their food. I just want to know if any consideration has been given by your party to stop subsidizing beef and dairy farmers and start subsidizing fruit and vegetable farming, or having subsidies for those with lower incomes to purchase healthier food, leading to healthier Canadians.
Thank you for your question. Mr. Young.
Well, we as a party, we want to actually work with all farmers to make sure that all Canadians have healthy food, not just the beef and pork, but also vegetables and everything. Every farmer across Canada, we need to support them so all of our Canadians have healthy food, and I mean everybody, so they can live a healthy life.
Mr. Miller?
Well, right in our platform, we have a commitment to support research to shift from conventional conventional agriculture to organic and regenerative farming. We have proposals for animal welfare legislation to hopefully correct with some of the things that are happening in intensive agricultural animal farming operations. We want to invest some money in a land trust program to have an opportunity to get young farmers back onto the land, and we want to give farmers the right to keep their seeds. We don't want, right now that the seeds are in the hands of major corporations, and farmers are actually sued when they try to plant the seed because corporations overseas, and Bayer in Germany owns the genetics. So farmers should be able to keep their seeds and develop their agriculture. But certainly regenerative agriculture is the where we're headed to go.
Ms. Cowie.
So I don't share this too often, and I don't know why I'm deciding to tonight, but I have had to use a food bank previously. I have used affordable housing. I have used subsidized childcare, and all of that helped me to become a lawyer, open up a business, and become a contributing member in our local economy. So I do understand the struggle. I think food security is very important. We're going to see more issues rising in that area as well if we don't try and get ahead of it. The Liberal government does have a food security program, but primarily for the north, so for more northern communities, Indigenous communities. I'm sure you've seen the news, the price of a head of lettuce can be $20, which is outrageous. So there are a lot of subsidies that go for those programs, and a lot of tweaking has been done on that in the last couple of years. But I do want to say that on a personal level too, the food bank is near and dear to my heart.
Thank you,
so
Ms.
near.
Cowie. Sorry.
Thanks.
Mr. Aitchison?
Thank you for the question, Suzanne. I'm learning a lot more about food in the last couple of years since I had heart surgery and learned that highly processed foods are really bad for your ticker. So I've learned a lot about that, and so there's nothing in our party platform specifically about that, but it is something that is near and dear to my heart, and obviously supporting the food bank. I didn't mean that pun, actually. It just comes unconsciously to me. I apologize. But it is near and dear to me, and of course I'd like to point out that there's the food co-op in Huntsville, for example, and I think that important programs like this have been supported by. I lost time because of laughing. Sorry, don't give me things. But supporting things like the food co-op and the FedNor funding that they've received over the years, I think that's important. The municipality supported them. I support them. It's not just about our health, but it's also about greening our economy, buying local, eating local. These are important things that can help reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as well. So
Thank you, Mr.
I need to
Aitchison.
learn more. Thank you.
Any further comments?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. My question is for Scott Aitchison, and my name is Rachel Boone. Just as your fellow party member, Doug Ford, whose cuts in taxes subsequently cut many important federal services in our area, and as your party and Andrew Scheer are promising cuts in taxes, can you tell us tonight what cuts in the federal services Huntsville and the riding of Parry Sound Muskoka can expect?
Mr. Aitchison.
The party platform focuses on cutting things like corporate welfare, as an example. But the nice thing about the situation that we're in right now is that we're not facing 14 years of Liberal deficits like Doug Ford has had to deal with. We're facing 4 years of it. And so we can constrain the growth of spending and not have to hack and slash. In fact, Andrew Scheer has made a commitment that a Conservative government would maintain and in fact increase by inflation at the very least the health and social transfers to the provinces. So we recognize that those needs are growing, but my fear, of course, is that with endless deficit spending, every dollar you're spending servicing that debt is a dollar that we're not spending on health and social services that we so desperately need.
Any rebuttal? Mr. Young.
Well, I'm for my life, very thankful for the services we've had here, because if it wasn't for the Children's Aid Society, I don't know where I would be today, to be honest with you. So I don't believe we should be going backwards, we should be going forward. There's a lot of people all over Ontario that are very upset with the cuts in education and in healthcare that Mr. Ford has made. And we don't believe in that. We believe in that we would support going forward with it, but not off of your tax dollars, off the rich people's tax dollars. That's where we would go and get the money and bring it back to where it's actually needed.
Ms. Cowie?
So I think the question that you asked, Rachel, is really important, because we do know cuts are coming if there's a Conservative government at the end of this. And we need to know where those cuts are going to be. Particularly from my stance, are they going to be on that affordable housing envelope? I don't know. Is there a plan for affordable housing just to extend our mortgages so we can pay more on interest? If that's the affordable housing plan, that's not going to be good enough. We can't afford the cuts to that envelope. High-speed broadband internet, is that where the cut's going to come? Can our economy, can our families handle that cut? We don't know. They're not clear on where these cuts are coming from.
Mr. Miller?
Well, we do, yeah, you're right, Trish, but we do know one area the cards are coming, and that's the environment, because we've seen the pattern before, you know, cut the carbon tax and then cut everything environment. Oh, wait a minute, that's Doug Ford's government. But just to give you an illustration, the Conservatives this time have already announced a cut in the environment. They'll cut the clean fuel standard. The clean fuel standard is a proposed standard to make gasoline a different formulation that emits less carbon dioxide, less greenhouse gases. And the Tories, even they're not even in power yet, and they already have announced they're cutting that. So we see the tendency that's coming. Cut in anything environmental, because that's what they don't want.
Anything further? All right, we'll take your question.
Hi, I'm back again. Paul Kubler. In the opening statements, I took some notes, and Mr. Aitchison, I didn't see you speak to climate change. Mr. Young, neither you. And Tricia Cowie did mention the environment at the fourth point. My question is, why are each of your parties recently jumping on the Green bandwagon? Because until the Green Party released its platform, your parties hardly mentioned real climate action. I mean real. Because a carbon tax doesn't do everything. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Mr. Miller.
Well, not one to start with, but because ours is the party that has a big list of things, but nonetheless.
It's your turn.
I have a little summary in front of me at a glance, and it's interesting. I do see I see all the check marks beside all the programs we propose. I see a few check marks for your party, and I see one check mark for the Liberals. There are not too many check marks in the Conservative column on doing something about climate change. It's simply not their priority. It's simply their plan. They have an elaborate plan. It's been independently assessed, and certainly assessed by us, and it doesn't work. It increases the greenhouse gases. It doesn't put forward any kind of solutions in this climate emergency. And that's the reality. That's the choice you have. You have a party that has a comprehensive plan to address the climate emergency, and a major party that has no plan that will address the climate emergency.
Ms. Cowie?
Sure. Well, I did mention the environment in my opening, but certainly climate action is part of that. And the price on pollution, that was a major one. You can't just cast it aside. That is going to be the major source of what's going to help us reduce our emissions. So that is a big one. And that actually took a lot of political capital for us to be able to do that. We have a very divided country on that issue, and we have to push forward on that. But other things that we've done, investing in clean technology. We've been investing billions of dollars in that department, and we're going to continue to see that to grow. And when it comes to other aspects of our environment, it's really important, and which I love, is the fact that more protected areas. So keeping Canada with national parks and coastal areas. So the track record of the last 4 years, they've done a lot, and they did that also in working and partnering with First Nation, Métis, and Inuit. And that's no easy task. You're dealing with a lot of stakeholders.
Mr. Aitchison?
I think the question was, why did our party not release their platform regarding climate change and the environment until after the Green Party did? And I can't speak to the National Party and how they release, they release platform policies every day. I can tell you that it is a very important issue to me. It has been in my entire time as mayor. We've done lots of things to try to address our footprint as a municipality, and it will be as a member of parliament. I think that one of the things that really is important to us as well, though, is the affordability of life in this country. And I think it's important that whatever proposals, whatever plans we have, any party, that we don't penalize Canadians, particularly Canadians that live in rural areas like ours. And so I think our platform is actually fairly balanced. It's a good start. There's more work to be done, and I'm eager to get there to Ottawa to do it.
Mr. Young?
Well, just a kind of a two-part question you asked there about our openings and then about our parties and when they come out. First of all, I just want to show you, I got cut off by that lady right over there, so I didn't get my plan finished when I started, and it is in here, just to let you know. And secondly, right from the start, we've had a full plan out, and right from the start, we've had climate emergency in that plan, and it's quite extensive. And I believe the Greens just came out with their full plan. I think it was a week and a half ago. And we were out long before that with our full climate plan.
Anything further? All right. Go ahead.
My name is Mike Wilkinson, and thank you to all the candidates for coming out and speaking to the public today. You all seem to have an agreement that there is a need for more affordable housing in the region. My question is a little bit twofold in that I'm curious as to when you speak about the need for affordable housing, are you referring more to single unit dwelling homes, or are you referring more into actually bringing in more like apartment style complexes into the region? Also, well, so I guess in relation to the density you're talking about, are you talking about high density or low density new affordable housing in the region? And in relation to the comments and bringing in workers, there's I think it was mentioned before, I can't remember specifically, but in terms of the need for potentially having more workers for a number of businesses apparently being short on employees, in terms of that, how much of the affordable housing would you say, in a percentage range of roughly, say 10%, how much do you see of that affordable housing being given to people within the local community versus the need you speak of about immigration and bringing in new workers into the region, if that's clear enough, please?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, you can get that in 1 minute. Good luck. You've won. Okay, Ms. Cowie, we'll begin.
I'm sorry, I don't know that I understood the last part of that question in terms of the percentages, but I'll answer as best I can. Or do you want to?
Anything you want to clarify?
Clarify?
If that's okay, please. Sorry, I'm not very good.
Just
at,
briefly. No, you're fine.
Sorry. Okay. In terms of that, I mean simply, would you say, in terms of the new affordable housing units that your parties might suggest, would you suggest, say, 20 to 30% would be for people coming into the community versus 80% for the local community, or 50% for local and an influx of a new population to the region?
Well, that's a tricky one.
Okay, Ms. Cowie.
All right. So the National Housing Strategy, it doesn't tie our hands in terms of what we might be investing in more, if it's a single detached house or if it's an apartment building. What I can say, as part of that $10 million that has been invested in this riding already in the last 2 years, there has been a lot of cooperatives in First Nation communities, which are successful. And I think that's an area that we need to explore more as well. We can also build on the spaces that we already have. It's a flexible strategy in terms of what we need to build for who. I hesitate to put it into percentages without knowing the percentages of the needs. So obviously I'm more interested in the people in Parry Sound Muskoka, but also recognizing that if we're going to grow our economy past the tourist season, we need to make more spaces for more people to be able to move up and enjoy our beautiful riding. So I would hesitate to be able to break that down to percentages.
You, Ms. Mr. Aitchison?
Thank you. It's a lot to jam in here. Affordable housing is a very specific segment of the housing spectrum, for sure, and there's certainly a need for that. It's more generally rental housing, and it's at a specific CMHC-defined rate. And so, yes, we need more of that. I think it's important to make sure that any federal program is actually funded through the local municipality. So in Muskoka, the Muskoka context, the District of Muskoka is responsible for housing. They maintain a list of people who need some assistance with housing. It's called the Social Housing Wait List. And I think, obviously, I want to make sure that we funnel any money and any supports for these programs through the district, because it is the best vehicle to make sure that the right mix is getting built in the community. And so the other thing I wanted to say, though, is that the language really more is called attainable housing now. What's attainable for you and what's attainable for me might be very different. So affordable is something very specific, but we do need a lot more stock in general. And so it's important to work in collaboration with the local municipalities, the province, and the federal government to make sure that there is more housing being built in general. Supply and demand will help this problem.
Mr. Young?
So we've committed to 500,000 new homes across Canada, and they have not told me a percentage for our riding, but I would do whatever I can and be very loud about it to get as much as we could for our riding. And to the other question you had about whether it's going to go to locals or to people just moving in here, whether you moved here yesterday or whether you were born here 55 years ago or you moved here a few months ago, you're a local once you live here. So as far as I'm concerned, a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian, and it's open to anybody that lives in this riding.
Mr. Miller?
Well, certainly, Scott's made a very good point. He understands the housing market extremely well, being a municipal mayor. But I think it's really important to understand, it may be challenging, but we're running for federal parliament, and it's what's federal jurisdiction. And the Fed's role in this is to fund these programs and feed them through the municipalities. Defining how your community is and who sits, how big the houses are and how they're allocated and what the communities look like, that's a community decision. That's based on discussion with your municipality. It's not the federal government's role. The federal government's role is to make sure there's enough money in the system that the programs can go ahead, and that's what our job is when we get to Parliament. But the communities define the dimensions and the character of their own communities.
Any rebuttal? Anyone else?
Not so much a rebuttal, but one more point that I wanted to make because I couldn't talk fast enough. But there are a number of businesses within Muskoka, I know right now, that are working together to try to help each other with the housing situation. Deerhurst is one of them, Tim Hortons, Fowler Construction. There's a number of them that are working together. And I think that there's things that we can do as government at all levels, again, that can assist them with that specific need that you identified to make sure that we're not, that all the new housing that might get built in this new plan and will get taken up by the corporations. So there's a way to work collaboratively with those corporations as well.
All right, our next questioner.
My name's Ellen Fox. I truly believe that the climate is the biggest issue facing this world, facing this planet, facing humankind today. The Green Party is saying not left, not right, forward together. And they are proposing that all of the parties come together and create a climate committee, more than a committee, and that they all commit to working together towards what we need to do to meet the climate Paris Accord agreement.
Could you please pose your question?
Yes, I'd like to know everyone's thoughts on doing that, and perhaps Gord Miller can explain it a little bit first.
All right, we'll begin with Mr. Miller then.
Okay. Well, the essential idea, the essence of the idea is, it goes back, and we refer back to World War II when the Germans were overrunning Europe and the Japanese were overrunning in Asia and the Pacific, and the world faced a tremendous crisis. And at that time, one solution was to say, well, we join together rather than fight and over our differences and policy and things, is come together in a cabinet. The federal cabinet was composed of all parties. It was a special cabinet struck because we were facing this existential threat. And we're saying the climate emergency is that kind of an emergency, and the first thing we would want to do is establish an all-party cabinet. Let's get together, put our differences aside, and get to work on the problem.
Mr. Aitchison?
I'm not sure if that's such a thing that is actually workable, but I think that there's certainly lots of committees that go on in the House of Commons and in Parliament, and clearly I would want to be involved in any committee that's dealing with the climate change issues. I think it's important to keep in mind, though, that at 1.6% of global output, Canada is a pretty small player in the global scheme. On a per capita basis, we are huge emitters of carbon pollution. There's no question about that. But we need to take this issue global. We have to lead by example. We have to invest in our entrepreneurs. We have to incentivize green technologies to replace carbon-based fuels. But we also have to see this as an opportunity for Canadians to sell technology to the world and help the rest of the world reduce their footprint as well. It's not just a Canadian problem. It is a global problem.
But Canada could be a leader.
Mr. Young?
Yep, I agree.
So yes, I agree that anything's possible. So the statement of, I'm not sure that's possible, I don't agree with that. Everything's possible as long as we all work together. And I mean bigger than just our government and bigger than just our parties. All Canadians, in fact, the whole world needs to work together because it's affecting everyone. So if we can get everybody together and make sure and we all do our little piece, then it would make a huge difference.
Ms. Cowie?
I would agree that we need to come and work together. We have to collaborate and we have to be able to hear other people's ideas, but we all have different ideas. We want to make a difference in climate change or climate action, or we want to do something different for climate action, but we have a different way to get there. But we do have to collaborate. But it's really important, especially when we're talking about climate action, we still have to balance competing interests. The environment and the economy, we have to weigh those two interests. We can't leave the economy behind in only worrying about the environment, because then we won't have the tools that we need to be able to continue with the climate action on the environment. So I think it's really important that we keep that in mind, and that's what this Liberal plan is about balancing those interests, making sure they are hand in hand, and that while we are making climate action, that we're not doing something detrimental to our economy at the same time.
I see Mr. Miller. Anyone else? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Miller.
Well, Tricia, I mean, the old story that we have to balance the economy with environment might have had validity 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, but the climate crisis is so substantive, there is no more balance. If we don't deal with this, there is no economy. This is a crushing crisis that is existential. We have to essentially deal with this, and the economy has to be adapted to the climate crisis. It's not a question of balancing the two anymore.
Mr. Young.
So in our plan, we agree that the climate emergency is very, very serious, but we are also saying that we're not going to leave anybody behind. So that comes into the economy, that we will start by cutting all the finances going to the big oil companies. And if you're buying pipelines and paying for that, you're not terribly serious about the climate change if you're still going to move oil. So we would also not leave anybody behind and create new green energy jobs, which would help the economy.
Because I'd certainly like to respond to that, because one of the other things that's in the Green Party platform is raising corporate taxes substantially from 15% to 21%. That is significant, and that is going to put a freeze on foreign investment into Canada. We can't allow that to happen. We have to balance these interests, and we can't ignore them. And we also can't ignore facts. One of the facts is, even if we were net zero tomorrow, it wouldn't put a dent in the global output, because we need China, we need the US, we need India on board with this. And it's not an excuse not to do nothing. I am not saying that. I am saying do it responsibly so that people don't get left behind. This is really important. Alberta, Saskatchewan, dealing with high unemployment, these are people's livelihoods. I don't know that we understand it the same way here in Ontario because we haven't been so reliant on that resource development. But it is real, and we have to do this together as a country, and we cannot just say one way or the other. It has to be a balanced, responsible approach.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. All right. Okay, so you will be our last questioners, the 4 people standing in this row, just so nobody else stands up. So go ahead.
My name is Yuta. I'm a commuter. I commute to work. I commute to help my parents in another town. They're in their 90s. So my question to Scott Aitchison, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, in the spirit of the person who spoke at the United Nations the other day, Greta Thunberg. Are you willing to find funds for public green transportation? For example, by making it mandatory to report all rental income to Revenue Canada, not just by those who pay a large percentage of their income in rent.
Mr. Aitchison.
The simple answer is yes. In fact, here in Huntsville, for example, one of the things we've tried to do is expand our transit, our small transit system, to make it more efficient, more effective, and better, more accessible to people. And one of the ways the federal government has assisted with that is through the gas tax. And so, the Conservatives had increased that. I think that's an important tool for municipalities to use, and I definitely 100% support that, helping municipalities provide more greener transportation.
Mr. Young.
So yes, we 100% agree with green transportation. We would fund buses going electric, a train for Muskoka that used to go through here, the Northlander, but we would go a little bit further and make sure it's a electric train that comes up here and has a better schedule so people could use it properly. And 100%, that's exactly what we want to do.
Mr. Miller?
Tom, you've been reading our policy again.
Thanks, Dad.
Certainly, the Green Party stands for putting Canadians back on the rails. We have a rail system. It's been neglected. We've abandoned passenger rail. It can be resupported. It can be refunded. And it has to be integrated. It has to be integrated with light rail that connects and with buses connect so people can move again. And, the Europeans, of course, if anybody's been there, has a fantastic rail system to move people around. We should have high-speed rail from Windsor to Quebec City and between Calgary and Edmonton. But the rail system is the center of our transportation system, and it has to be restored. It has to be functional again, so people can commute and get around and get to the medical facilities in Toronto.
Ms. Cowie?
So I would echo some of Scott's comments with regard to the gas tax. I do know that that was increased in recent years. Also, in rural communities, we don't have as much access to public transportation, but so what is there in place is access to infrastructure money for roads and bridges, and we have that benefit here. It's really important to be investing in electric vehicles. We've seen a rebate program at a federal level. And when it comes to rail and passenger, today they actually announced, or the Liberal Party announced, that they would work with Via Rail to bring people from the city north to more northern ridings.
Anything else? All right.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Uta, you asked a question about tax, and I didn't understand it, and I don't think anybody really addressed it. Do you mind, Madam Moderator?
By the way, my name's Yuta.
Okay.
Did
Yuta.
I not say
It's okay.
Uta?
Yeah, I think it's okay. Go ahead. Yes. Could you repose the latter part of your question, please?
About the tax?
Yes.
Well, one of the ideas I had is there's a lot of rental income that's collected by people that I suspect is not reported to Revenue Canada, because a lot of people don't pay above a certain percentage of their income in rent, so it's unreported because they don't get a rebate.
And
back.
what's your question specifically?
Well, my original question, are you willing to find ways to fund public green transportation?
But as it relates to the latter part, do you have a question?
No, it was not a question.
Okay,
it was
that was
an
a statement.
example of how
Okay.
funds could be raised.
Oh,
Okay.
I apologize. Okay, I understand now.
Thank you very much, Yuta.
Sorry.
Move on to the next question. Thank you.
Hi, Trevor Frith. At the moment, the message to all. At the moment, Canadian media must charge HST to all customers for all types of advertising. Foreign companies such as Google, etc., do not. Who will make the playing field level by dropping all taxes on media advertising in Canada? Thank you.
Mr. Young?
Well, I'll be honest with you, I don't know if we even have a platform on that, but I'm not in favor of increasing taxes, but I'm also not in favor of dropping them either. I mean, taxes pay for services that we all want, so it does have to be paid for that way. But again, I'm not in favor of increasing it to the average person. But again, I'm not in favor of dropping them either.
Mr. Miller?
Well, it's in our platform for under a fair taxation policy. We're not in favor of dropping all taxes on all media. Rather, we want to go after Google and the other internet companies that operate and steal business from advertising and don't pay tax on it. So that has to be, and I don't know what international negotiations have to go on, but certainly these big internet companies can't come in and steal the business away from local media companies and not pay their fair share of taxes. So that's right in the platform.
Ms. Cowie?
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything in the platform about dropping taxes for all media, and I don't know that I would support that. I need more information on it. But also when it comes to the Green Party platform on making Google pay, I think you have a practical issue of how are you going to do that. You're going to tackle that international issue. I think we have more important things in this writing that we have to look at as opposed to trying to make an international company pay that. So my focus would be more on protecting our environment, again, affordable housing, broadband internet, and reconciliation in this writing.
Mr. Richardson?
Yeah, I actually disagree with what Trish just said, but I do agree with what Gord said. I think we should be more inclined to go after Google to pay. It's a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and instead of doing things like sticking it to the little guy and raising taxes every time we turn around here, I'm more inclined to support it. There's nothing in our party platform specifically about this either, but I agree wholeheartedly with what Gord Miller just said.
Anything further? Okay, thank you. Hello.
Hi, my name's Carolyn Wagland. I'm going to frame this question. I've got 2 kids in my household that are coming to the polls within the next 5 years, and I want you to give me a real exciting bit of information that I can take home to them tonight. I want to know how each one of you, the candidates up here, how your platforms and your priorities line up with the United Nations Global Development, Sustainable Development Goals, which one's most important to you, and how that aligns with your platform.
Hope you did your homework. Mr. Miller?
Well, the United Nations Global Sustainable Development Goals are right in our platform. They're listed right in there. They're I think, the second page or third page. We go, and so we are totally aligned and committed to fulfill that. But for something to tell your kids, I'll tell you this. We support lowering the voting age to 16 years old, because if you're old enough to drive a car and the responsibilities associated with that, you're old enough to become engaged in the voting system of this country and help us make the decision and get in the habit of voting early on, so that when you get busy in later life in your 20s or in your 30s and you have children, you've already developed a habit of participating in politics and voting. So that's something to tell the kids, that they should be able to vote at 16.
Ms. Cowie?
I'm not sure where the party platform lines up with that specific of a question, to be honest. So I would leave it at that. In terms of getting your kids excited about politics and excited to vote, I mean, it's so... my son here, he's 12, and I appreciate his support being here tonight. How excited he is about it, I don't know. I think it depends on what he sees and the interactions with people. And some of it, you get to meet so many different people, and address all their concerns in a conversation. And sometimes you agree, sometimes you don't, but it's just exciting to meet all the people in this riding. And that's exciting about politics. And if you love your community, it's not that hard to take that extra step up and ask to be elected as a representative.
Mr. Richardson?
Thank you for the question. I wholeheartedly support the Millennium Development Goals as outlined by the United Nations. I'm a big fan of Jeffrey Sachs and his efforts to do the Millennium Villages project. I think that's a brilliant idea, and I'm a big supporter of Canadians actively being involved in foreign aid. And well, there's nothing in our party platform about it. I'm a big believer that we need to work with all kinds of struggling nations and reducing and eliminating some of the debt that they're struggling to work under. I'm a big believer that Canada has a role to play in the world. I also believe that young people have a role to play in the world, and I've said this before. As the mayor, I created a youth council here in Huntsville, and I'd like to do something similar for the riding if I'm the member of parliament, and I would engage young people very directly on issues that matter to them and give them a voice in terms of what my job is as a member of parliament.
Mr. Young.
I think Ronan's looks very excited on all of our debates here. It's exactly what he wants to do every night. But I'm not aware of our policy on the UN, but I will tell you something super exciting for the kids here, and that is that how about no cost barriers whatsoever from kindergarten to career. We want to, and we would put in that there would be no interest on student loans from the government. We would get rid of that completely right away, and then eventually we would turn the student loans into forgivable grants. So it should be part of our public school, our public system, education system, right from kindergarten up to your career.
Thank you very much. The UN Development Goals, Green Party has them in their book.
Thank you, Ms. Wagman. Anything else rebuttal-wise? No? All right. Our last question.
Good evening. My name is Gloria Schimmel. I believe most of the audience and those at the table up on the platform would agree that Parry Sound Muskoka has a drug crisis. It's not limited to this riding. It is a national problem. I'd like to give those at the table the opportunity to explain to us their party's policies on the drug crisis in Canada. Thank you.
Ms. Cowie.
We do have an opioid crisis in this area. And being a lawyer and working in criminal and family court, I see it pretty regularly. And there are a few things that are really important because the opioid crisis, I mean, there's a criminal element to it, but the focus as well needs to be on saving human lives. And I know that they can be controversial, but safe injection sites, that's what they do. They save lives. And it is important to make space for those in communities. But again, when it comes to cracking down on crime, we do need to be able to provide our tools to police forces so that they can investigate and work on it from that angle. But I would like to be very clear on the importance of safe injection sites. They do save lives.
Mr. Aitchison?
Thank you for the question. No doubt that exactly what you have said, there is a major opioid crisis, not just in our community, but all across this country. And I think any responsible member of parliament, any government elected will work collaboratively with the provinces to ensure that we're putting all the resources we can into, as Tricia said, dealing with the crime element and getting these drugs off the street. I've talked to the detachment commander Graham here in Huntsville, and regularly he tells me about stories where they've done a bust and they've gotten all kinds of these opioids off the street. So we need to support our OPP, and we need to make sure that we're working collaboratively to reduce the amount of opioids that are getting into our streets and that are damaging our society.
Mr. Young?
We need to decriminalize personal drug possession offenses and make it very clear, not legalizing drugs, but decriminalizing it, because people want to get help, but they're worried about getting arrested, and we've got to fix that. A lot of people get hooked because they were given prescription for whatever reason, and then they got hooked on it, and now they can't get off of it, and we've got to help those people. We would support the provinces to support the overdose prevention sites as well. Right? We've got to help these people, and if we keep it as a criminal offense, then they won't come and get the help that they really need. And make it very clear, not legalizing it, we would still go after the drug dealers and the big corporation, or the big whoever's dealing the drugs as well.
Mr. Miller?
And just a few days ago, Elizabeth May, Tom, announced that we too would decriminalize the possession of these drugs. Remember, as you say, this is not legalizing. This is still going after the drug sellers, the importers, the pushers. Those are criminals, and they would be dealt with by the police as criminals. But people who are hooked and users and dependent on this, That's a health crisis. That's not a criminal act. And we have to move it to a health crisis and treat them accordingly. You're finding these people dead in the alleys and such things is happening across this country is totally unacceptable. We've got to interject and not take people to jail. Interject and get people the treatment they need to get off these, and while maintaining the criminal justice system to stop the importation, because that's what comes from overseas.
Anything further for any of the candidates? Ms. Cowie.
Yeah, there's only one thing I would add quickly, and with a lot of addictions, it's a mental health issue as well. So it's really important that we have mental health funding, and that is something that this government did in the past 4 years, was commit another $3 billion with mental health, with new funding there, and I think that that's an important aspect of it as well.
Okay. Thank you for all the great questions from our audience. We are going to now move on to closing statements, and the first person up is Gord Miller.
Thank you. Well, it was seen tonight there are a number of issues, federal issues to be dealt with in this election, but I'd like to bring the focus back to our central issue, which is the global climate emergency. I do this because it's so important and so central, and because we're not on track to meet our targets, our international commitments. We're not going there, and we have to, and we're not on track, to meet with the turmoil that's going to result as the climate changes us. So we have to get a new parliament in place. With this election, we need a parliament that is committed to dealing with that task. It's especially important in this parliament because it's likely to be a minority parliament. Looks like the two major parties are just a point apart, and that means a minority parliament. And the Green Party is going to elect more members than it ever has, and just like in the British Columbia Parliament, where we have 3 members and the two big parties are tied, we have leverage. We have we control the balance of power and can change the way Parliament acts. And just like in the New Brunswick legislature, where the two big parties are tied again, and the Green Party has 3 seats and had a huge influence on what happens in that parliament, we're going to use that leverage in this parliament. So it's really important that we use that to end the dictatorship of the majority governments that we have seen for the last 14 years, first 10 years of Tories and then 4 years of Liberals. We must do this. Everything depends on this, and I would go to the words of Greta Thunberg, who's been mentioned earlier, the 16-year-old, such a remarkable young woman, and I'm going to read a quote because it's very important to this. Greta said, when talking about this very thing, she said, "If we fail, all of our achievements and progress will be for nothing, and all that will remain of our political leaders' legacy will be the greatest failure in human history. And they will be remembered as the greatest villains of all time because they have chosen not to listen and not to act." I don't want to be remembered as one of those villains. I want to go to Ottawa as your MP and act. That's what this election is about. Now, I've got a few seconds left, so I'm going to take that time and remind you that tomorrow around the world, millions of people will be demonstrating in what's called a global climate strike. We have such a demonstration right here in Huntsville. It will be at City Hall at 11:30. I'll be there. It's a nonpartisan activity. I suspect other people at this table will be there. Please come out and help us and demonstrate the importance of the global climate emergency to the world and to future generations. So I hope to see you at City Hall 11:30 tomorrow morning on the street there with the rest of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Young.
So I do have a closing statement. My manager's going to kill me for doing this. I want to speak to you from my heart. So for many, many years, we've seen our governments, it's either been Liberals, basically, or Conservatives. And yet we're still here at another election hearing all kinds of promises. And we shouldn't be where we are right now when it comes to housing, when it comes to the climate, if the governments were doing their job in the first place for all these years. 4 years ago, Mr. Trudeau told us that he would introduce pharmacare. And 4 years later, he's promising that again. And he still hasn't done it. I have a huge issue with Mr. Scheer. I believe he's going to do whatever Doug Ford tells him to do. I really believe that. Doug Ford has shown here exactly what he's going to do. They're going to keep putting more taxes on us, and they're going to keep doing cuts. and that's wrong. So I truly, truly, truly believe that the NDP is the party. You've got to put somebody in new. If you want changes and you want something new, you better put somebody in that's new and has great ideas. We have farmer care, which we've been talking about, and we will implement it. The first thing we'll do is stop the big money and the big subsidies going to all these big oil companies and the medication companies and the telecom companies, right? They've got enough money as it is. We shouldn't be subsidizing for them. We should be taking that money and putting it right here where it belongs. So that's what we're going to do. We will create housing, and enough of the talk. We're going to start to act. If you put us or put me in Ottawa, I will definitely do the acting. I promise you it's going to happen because we have to do it now. We can't wait any longer for not just climate, but for housing, for minimum wage, for everything that you need. We need to act, and we need to go after the big, big people that have the money to be able to pay for this. And if we put 1% tax on anybody that has more than $20 million in net worth, 1% to them is diddly squat. But it means a lot to you and I. So one thing I really, really want to do as if you elect me as member of parliament is I want to put the faith, the honor, and the integrity back into being an MP for Parry Sound Muskoka. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Mr. Aitchison.
Well, I want to thank everyone again for coming out. You know, it's important to be engaged in our elections, and I think it's great that there are as many people here as there are. I want to thank all the candidates who are here. I think it's a tough thing to put yourself up here in this kind of position, and I respect everyone who's done this. You know, I've been in public life for a long time, and I've always believed that it's not just a job, it's a sacred trust. It's a role that is in service to your community. I've certainly operated that way as a municipal councillor, and I'd like to show all of Parry Sound Muskoka how I can do that as their member of parliament, to fight for them, to work with a government that will live within its means, balance the budget, and set priorities to help us reduce our carbon footprint, but also help Canadians get ahead, not just get by. I know of all kinds of people that live in our community right here who are just struggling to get by. And to me, that's not acceptable in one of the richest countries in the history of the world. We want to work for Canadians, to help Canadians get ahead, and I want to work to help make sure that the people of Parry Sound are not forgotten by policymakers in places like Ottawa and Toronto that forget that we don't all live in big cities. I'm a dedicated leader in our community, and I will prove to you that as a member of parliament, I will work hard for every single member of our community, and that I will always be accessible and responsive and engaged always with every community and all citizens of Parry Sound Muskoka. I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I'm sticking around, so if you have any more questions for me, I'm happy to talk to you some more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Aitchison. Ms. Cowie.
Thank you. Yes, thank you everybody for coming out tonight. I really appreciate your time. Thank you to the organizers and to my friends here on stage. And I do want to say, I really believe that this riding is a progressive riding. This is a riding that wants to keep pushing forward on the environment, on climate action, on affordable housing. We know at the end of this election, we're going to have a Liberal or Conservative government. Do you trust that action on the environment is going to continue as aggressively as it has? Do you trust that that affordable housing money is going to be there? I can't say that I have confidence that it will be, and that will be detrimental to the people in this riding. My job is to pull together that progressive voice. I want you to trust me to continue to push forward on those issues. The platform has it, and I want to be the one to fight for it for you. When it comes to the environment, we have to be serious about pushing forward on climate action. And quite frankly, a vote to the Green Party isn't the way to do it, because they're not going to form government. We need a seat at the table. We cannot lose that price on pollution. It is absolutely essential to lowering our emissions. And this talk about a minority government, you're taking a big gamble. Because if the Conservatives get in there, you know the first thing they're going to do is take 10 steps back and get rid of the price on pollution. That is a major problem. And I also want to end on another progressive note, and I want to talk about reconciliation. Because in 2015, the TRC released a report. We know about the history of Canada here with Indigenous people. We have to continue to push forward on implementing those recommendations. And I know that this riding cares about that. It is the one issue in the past 4 years that I've continued to hear, Tricia, how can I help? What can we do? What is reconciliation? Send me, a First Nation woman, to continue to push forward on that. And at the end of the day, what I'm looking for, I'm not just looking to get by. I want to continue with that transformative change that I was talking about earlier. We have a major opportunity here in Canada, and we have an opportunity in this riding to make a big statement about where we want to go. And that's why I'm asking for your support in October. I want to be the person to do that for us. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ms. Cowie. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking all of our candidates for being here this evening. And thank you indeed for coming. I would also sincerely like to thank the Algonquin Theatre staff, who are phenomenal to work with. If you ever have the opportunity, I highly recommend it. I would like to thank 105.5 Moose FM, Hunters Bay Radio, Huntsville Doppler, Metroland Media, the Lakelands Association of Realtors, Cogeco's Your TV, of course, the Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. We're very pleased to be here tonight. Please encourage your network of contacts to vote, and good luck to each of you. Thank you for being here. Good night.
And there we can see the handshake as the debate is closing off. Welcome back to the after show of Behind the Ballot. Anthony and I have been watching avidly as the debate has gone on for the last 2 hours. So Anthony, we're going to jump right into this. So let's, first of all, before we get into any of the issues or anything like that, let's just talk about the candidates, because this is kind of, I think our first opportunity to really see kind of how each of them have done. So let's go. Which one do you think you prefer to talk about first here?
Well, you know what? Let's start at the end and let's talk about Tom and Tom Young representing the NDP. Mm-hmm. I think what's interesting first off is that there was an interesting dynamic at the table, because you've got Scott, Mayor of Huntsville, at the Huntsville debate. You've got Tricia, Liberal candidate again, so comfortable being there. And then you've got Gordon, Tom, who are new. Yeah. So interesting dynamics right away. I think Tom seemed, I was very surprised by actually his overall debate. I think it was pretty strong. Yep. The word that kept on coming to mind was energized. He seemed very passionate about running for the NDP. He seemed fairly confident in a lot of what he was saying, and if he didn't know, he said that. He said, I'm not really sure. And I think that's really important, that if he started to get away from that, people start to see that pretty quickly.
It's important to note too, Tom is an overall newcomer to politics. Gord actually, as mentioned, has been, sort of mixed in with provincial politics in the past, as the environmental commissioner. Tom did have a foray, running for municipal politics in Bracebridge, didn't get in. So I think it's interesting to see someone who may not have sort of an idea, I'm sure that he has an idea of how things work, but this is very new to him. His background isn't in politics. And so to see him kind of jump in with both feet and kind of mix in with these candidates, it's good to see that.
Well, and running for a ward is very different than running to be one of 338 people representing
yes, for the entire country.
Yeah. And I think he held his own tonight, which I think is really important. As far as Gord Miller is concerned, I think the difference with him is that he comes at it from a very bureaucratic standpoint, and I think that showed tonight. Yep. And from past provincial and federal Green candidates, Technically, he was very sound, but there was a lot of the bureaucrat in him coming out. And I think some people, maybe, and from what we saw, right, and some people maybe at home might agree with me as well, is that he was often referring to his notes.
Yes.
He didn't look as comfortable with what he was saying, and I'm not sure if that's necessarily what he's done with all the debates, or if he just wanted to make sure that he was on cue with his talking points as well.
I think being a bureaucrat and not a politician, they're two completely different things, you know, and as a bureaucrat, you're used to going to meetings and having notes to refer to. You're not really making you're making presentations, but you're not really sort of making putting a show on for the people that you really want to, you know, try to impress. It's more of a, what are the facts and what are the details here? And that does kind of shine through with Gord. I'm curious what you think, though, because, I mean, bureaucrats tend to not be Green Party members. It tends to be a certain type of person that's a Green Party member, right? Teachers, other, types of situations. And so this is, especially for Parry Sound Muskoka, this feels kind of like a new sort of version of a Green Party member, right? What's your thoughts on that?
I think it's an interesting take, because for so many years when the Green Party started, it was usually, far left environmentalists. And, when you actually start to look at their policies, and as they've become what I think a lot of people look at as a more mainstream option, their economic policies are fairly conservative with how they approach things. So I think it's opened up a lot more. And I also think that the more attention that is being put on our environment and climate, it legitimizes the party more as a real alternative. And we're seeing that in provincial elections. We're seeing that internationally as well.
With Mike Schreiner,
so
for sure, So the hypothetical question, I'm not asking you to answer this because it's very hypothetical, does Gord's bureaucratic chops and political background weigh out against sort of what the Green Party has usually been viewed as, which is sort of and in no offensive way whatsoever meaning this, but sort of a hippie sort of party situation, right? Not saying whatsoever the Green Party is a hippie party, but I think they tend to get that kind of vibe from people. So Gord brings this entirely different persona to it. So hypothetically, will that help him in the future? I think is the question we'll be looking for.
I don't know. I think ultimately what it comes down to, two things in this riding is the national trend. Whether we like it or not, a lot of us will be voting based on the national leader. The fact of the matter is that when Canada started 2 years ago, an MP represented 750 people. They now represent 100,000 people. And we're all different. And in 1867, we weren't that different, really. So I think all the parties are drawing in candidates that come from a variety of backgrounds and different walks of life. So I think in this riding, I don't think it will have a major effect. I think they look at the candidates yes, for their backgrounds in terms of their abilities, but also looking at national trends as well.
All right, let's sink our teeth into Scott Aitchison. So
okay, Scott. By far the word that I wrote down was comfortable. Scott is always comfortable on the stage in front of the mic. Right, it's his thing. He's had the most experience at the municipal level, and I think he was very comfortable. He was very comfortable with the platform. One of the other words that I wrote down was very rehearsed. He knows his gig. He knows to say thank you after every question. I appreciate that.
He's respectful of the other candidates.
Very respectful of the other candidates. We are not an urban riding where attacking the other candidate is going to bode well for you. We in Parry Sound Muskoka, we don't like those sorts of politics. We don't see it as blood sport, whereas in other ridings it certainly is. And I think Scott was strong on the issues. He wasn't angry. He looked and I think wanted to look very parliamentarian. And I think he pulled that off tonight.
Here's the interesting thing about Scott Aitchison, because I've worked alongside of him for 4 years, being in Muskoka. He tends to have a very strong opinion about things. Being a mayor and being on district council, he's come forward with his strong ideas, which, not saying good or bad, just, he comes forward with these ideas. And he tends to, I found in the past that he tends to be not aggressive, but sort of, he won't stand down or back down from a fight. I didn't see that version of Scott in this situation at all, which is interesting to me because I'm wondering if maybe, if he maybe is toning that back a bit just to kind of, because he's new, this is new for him. He hasn't run as a federal, or provincial politician before. So I'm wondering if he's kind of holding back to kind of test the waters and see what the others will do. And I'm just wondering, we have quite a few more debates to come up, the October 10th one for your TV coming up, and see if maybe that will change over time, if Scott will maybe possibly get a little more, again, aggressive is the wrong word, but a little more opinionated, overly passionate about what he's talking about.
I think it will depend on their polling numbers too. Most, if you look at Poll Tracker, Election Prediction, CTV Nanos, all the different polling organizations are predicting this riding to go Conservative. So it's kind of his to lose. So I think if he was to shift into a different mode, it could have the negative effect on him. The only way that we'll see that come into play with him is if internal polling starts to show that support for the Conservatives are starting to trend down nationally, and right now it's neck and neck. So if we see a massive turn, he may have to go that route. But again, he looked mayoral tonight.
Yes.
And you're right. And when we've had him on Muskoka Matters, very respectful. Only once did I ever see him really start to get agitated, and that was dealing with One Muskoka and things like that. And it was still in a respectful way, but a very forceful way. And I think as a politician, we can go back to Stan Darling, who always said, it doesn't, yes, I represent the progressive Conservatives, but ultimately I serve all people in Parry Sound Muskoka, and that's what you wanted to see from all of the candidates tonight.
So, the only candidate to run again, Tricia Cowie. So, a returning candidate, the only returning candidate. I will start out by just saying, I'm happy to see that she's owned the fact that 2015 was a thing, and she didn't win. So, and that's not. And it's never really been in Tricia's way to kind of sweep things under the rug in that way. Tricia's always been extremely kind of open about her feelings and what she's dealt with, and her shortcomings as well. So again, no surprise on that. Tell me your thoughts.
It was interesting with Tricia. I kind of felt at the start that one of the things that I said was. I felt that she had a weak opening. She looked a little bit nervous, maybe because she was coming into Scott's territory. I haven't had a chance to see any of the other debates locally, so it might have been stronger earlier on. I felt that once she got into the debate a little bit and on topics that she felt that she knew she had to defend, the challenging thing for Tricia is that she's a Liberal, not elected, having to defend a government. So it's a unique position, really, that you're running to be the MP for the first time, but also defending a party that served for the last 4 years. So one of the things that I said, though, is as the debate went on, I felt she got comfortable, she really found her footing, and she really started to get a lot stronger throughout the debate. And I think that was important.
So just to note, earlier today, Tricia was met by her party leader, Justin Trudeau. I almost said Justin Timberlake. Justin Trudeau, the same, different JT. Justin Trudeau was in Parry Sound to kind of give her area a boost. I wanted to, not her ego, but her area, her riding a boost. Do you think that helped give her a little bit momentum in this debate?
For sure, and it's no accident that the Prime Minister has been to this riding twice. Once for her nomination and once in Parry Sound, and I think also the Prime Minister also did a stop.
The Liberal leader.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, sorry. The Liberal leader also did a stop somewhere else in the riding as well. So the Prime Minister or the Liberal leader would not be stopping this riding if they didn't think that it was a winnable riding. There's about 90 seats in Canada that are kind of up for grabs. So, they're not going to waste their time. They have a short amount of time. I know 38 days seems like a lot. It's really not when there's 338 ridings. And one of the interesting things that I thought connected to that, though, is that Scott hasn't met Andrew Scheer yet. He hasn't. So that's kind of interesting. And what I wanted to say to that is that maybe there's a reason for that, and I won't be surprised if we see a Scheer sighting.
I will
soon.
say something to that, which I will not cite the information. I'm a journalist. I do not cite my sources. Someone who will remain unnamed made an interesting comment to me that leaders don't show up unless they're concerned about the writing. So if you're looking at it through that lens, it's quite possible that maybe Trudeau is concerned because this has always been primarily has been a blue riding.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fact, right? Until Tony Clement vacated the seat earlier this year. He officially vacated the seat just a couple of weeks ago. So the possibility here is, before all this SNC Lavalin, well, even, the recent happenings, which I won't go into, we all know what they were.
Yeah.
Trudeau may have been a little more confident that this could turn to a red riding. And now, because of all that, it's a possibility if you're looking through the lens of that I'm describing to you.
Yeah.
Maybe Trudeau believes that this, his grip is slipping on the possibility of turning this place around. Yeah. So that could be a possibility, and that could also lead to why we may not see Andrew Scheer at all in this riding.
I don't know. I know, watching a lot of the discussion around SNC Lavalin and things like that, we bring that up, but I question how much. Even myself, how much do we really know what that issue is about other than it's SNC Lavalin? Mm-hmm. And I don't know if the average voter really understands that much about it, other than those that have already committed to the Conservative Party say, the Prime Minister did something horrible around SNC Lavalin, and the Liberal supporters say he did what he had to do to protect potentially 9,000 jobs.
Yes.
The average voter, I'm not sure that has that much invested in that issue.
Yeah.
I don't know. This riding would always be difficult to win as a Liberal.
Yeah.
The only, 93 when Andy Mitchell won, it certainly helped. For sure, that the Conservative Party had split into the Reform Party and the Conservative Party. So this traditionally has been a slam dunk riding for the Conservatives. Mm-hmm. However, with the change in terms of different jobs coming into Muskoka and different opportunities, we do see a demographic shift a little bit. But on top of that, though, we also see a demographic shift in retirees coming.
Yeah.
And retirees, what are they concerned about? I'm going to be one of them in the next 15, 20 years.
Well, you're concerned about your nest egg.
I'm concerned about, right.
Yeah.
So, and you tend to be more conservative with your values. So it will be interesting. I would certainly, I'll bet you $1 that Andrew Scheer does a run through this riding.
We'll see. I might take you up on that bet. We're running short on time here, so let's quickly just talk about some of the issues. Now, the one thing I will note, there was an issue, I think, with sort of the way these questions were formatted. There was kind of a wildly off in all directions situation. It wasn't really a clear path of what the issue is that we're talking about here. I did find a lot of the issues tend to be national level rather than local. Mm-hmm. So tell me what you think.
So I think overall we have to, I think it's great that our local community has these opportunities for people to come out and hear the issues. I think it's important, though. I've now seen the same format used both provincially and federally here in Huntsville, and there's a dire need for change.
Yeah.
I think we need to, the questions from the audience could happen in the hour before when it's meet the candidates at Partners Hall. That's great. Or if you have a question, they need to go to the moderator earlier rather than from the audience. Because yes, we want to hear from the people, but we also want to hear as many voices as we can, and we avoid the long, drawn-out.
Well, the situations of, we had a couple there. It was a statement rather than a question, and that led to some confusion, and it also wasted time, to be honest.
So I think what I would love to see moving forward is more topics and then have statements from each, and then let the candidates actually talk it out so that there's more in between. If we are looking to, and I'm a teacher by trade, if we are looking to engage young people, nothing that happened tonight would engage young people. So it's really difficult to go from head to head to head and not have the discussion, because then there's more free thought, there's more opportunity to actually get discussions out rather than the talking points on the page.
So interesting you mentioned the need for more debate. I'm hearing that's what you're saying, right? Interestingly enough, your TV will be running a candidates debate on October 10th. The term debate is actually going to fit into that situation. We will be allowing for a debate in between the questions posed. So the candidates, as you have aptly said, we'll have more opportunity to converse these topics rather than we're moving from question to question. So,
and I think that works really well at the local level, at the riding level. At the national stage, it won't. We'll see that on October 7th and October 10th. It will be a disaster as usual, probably. But locally, there's far more respect amongst the candidates, and I actually think you're going to dive deeper into those issues. So when we talk about a national housing strategy, they'll be able to talk about it with their parties, but then they'll also be able to say, how will it impact us here?
So I'd like to just note too, and you said October 7th and the 10th. The 7th, let's just make sure to clarify the fact for our viewers, the 7th is the English debate, the 10th is the French one. So you're free and open, unless you speak French, and hey, you want to watch that debate, that's fine. You can watch the national debate on the 7th, and then tune in on the 10th to your TV at 8 o'clock p.m. We will have, we were hoping to have all 5 candidates set up for that debate. I did, on that note, just want to make sure we missed out on Michelle Smith tonight. There was I believe she was reached out to a few times to take part in this debate here. That didn't happen. Obviously, we did not see her. Your TV has also reached out to her to participate in the debate coming up, and Michelle Smith is the People's Party of Canada representative, which I'm sure everyone is aware now has been invited to the national level debate. So hopefully we will see.
Their leader has, yes.
So once again, October 10th, 8 o'clock p.m. is when that debate is coming up. So take the opportunity to tune in and check out, and we'll offer maybe a more in-depth look at what these issues really are. The questions themselves, I myself will be moderating that debate, and so the questions will be brought forward from me. There's no audience opportunity there, but I think that kind of does help move the conversation ahead as well. We're kind of rounding out the time here, so final thoughts on this debate tonight.
I think it was important that they all got to come to Huntsville and for people to hear what their party stands for and how they'll represent us. They all had different views on how they see their role as a parliamentarian, and I think that's important when we're electing a local representative. I want to know how you're going to represent my voice in Ottawa, and I think we got to hear that from 4 individuals that are just like you and I, that have decided to do one of the hardest jobs, and that's to represent 100,000 people to our national parliament, and we have to praise them for that.
And I thank you for saying that, because I think it's extremely important to note the fact that, all of our conversations aside, we're not putting down anyone here, but these people have done the bravest thing possible to get up on stage and try to, basically win this contest to say who is the best person to represent this area. That's an overwhelming task to take on, and I think you have to have a certain type of personality in order to be able to do that. And I applaud each and every one of these candidates for taking that chance and taking that risk. It's an amazing thing for somebody like that to do. So we are going to round out Behind the Ballot for tonight. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Anthony, I really appreciate you taking the time.
It's great to be here.
Well. Once again, October 10th, 8 p.m., tune into your TV for our live debate.